Hey everyone, welcome to Cartoonology. Today I want to argue that classic SpongeBob SquarePants is one of the most quietly detailed fictional universes ever built for a children's cartoon. Not because of the jokes. The jokes were great, but you already know that. The reason this show deserves 3 hours of your time tonight is everything running underneath the jokes. The history, the backstories, the geography, the grief, the loneliness, and the genuine love that the people who made this show poured into a world set at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean beneath a nuclear testing site. Bikini Bottom has a timeline stretching back to prehistoric times. Its main characters carry histories that most people who grew up watching the show never fully absorbed. The building where SpongeBob works was converted from a retirement home. The man who owns it grew up wearing clothes made from garbage. The neighbor who hates SpongeBob once sat alone in a white void at the end of time and broke down crying because he missed him. This is not a stretch. This is the show. It was always this deep. Most of us were just too young to catch all of it. So tonight, we are going to go through all of it. The world, the history, the characters, the creator, and everything the classic era hid in plain sight across 3 seasons and 1 movie that was supposed to be the ending. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free, and it really does help us keep making these videos for this community we have built together. Anyway, that is enough from me. Let us get into it. The world beneath the world. What Bikini Bottom actually is. Classic SpongeBob SquarePants is not just a cartoon. Bikini Bottom is not just a backdrop. It is a city with a real history, going back thousands of years, full of characters carrying decades of personal pain and backstory, sitting on top of geography that was carefully mapped out, populated by creatures with relationships and jobs and grudges and dreams. And most of us absorbed all of it without ever stopping to think about what we were actually looking at. So tonight, that is exactly what we are going to do. We are going to look at it properly, and we are going to start at the very beginning. Not with SpongeBob, not with the Krusty Krab. We are going to start with the city itself, because before you can understand any of the characters who live there, you need to understand the place they live in. And Bikini Bottom, it turns out, is a lot more than you remember. Let's talk about where Bikini Bottom actually is. Steven Hillenberg, the man who created SpongeBob SquarePants, was a marine biologist before he was a cartoon maker. He spent years studying the ocean, teaching people about sea life, and thinking about what lives beneath the surface of the water. So when he built Bikini Bottom, he didn't just make up a random underwater city and throw some fish in it. He placed it in a real location. Bikini Bottom sits at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, directly beneath a real place called Bikini Atoll. Bikini Atoll is a small chain of islands in the middle of the Pacific, and Hillenberg confirmed this placement himself. In the first SpongeBob movie, when the camera pulls back from Bikini Bottom and rises all the way out of the water into outer space, it comes out of the Pacific Ocean. That's not an accident. That's a deliberate confirmation of where this city is. Now here is where it gets interesting. Bikini Atoll, the real place sitting above Bikini Bottom on the surface, is known for something very specific in the real world. Between the 1940s and the 1950s, the United States government used Bikini Atoll as a nuclear testing site. They detonated atomic bombs there. The islands were evacuated, and the environment was fundamentally changed by decades of radiation exposure. The show never directly says this. It never brings it up in a way that would make a child ask questions. But it's there. And when you look at Bikini Bottom, a city full of talking fish and sea creatures who walk on 2 legs, drive boats like cars, eat at fast food restaurants, and go to school, the idea that this place might have been shaped by something strange happening in the water above it starts to feel less like a coincidence and more like a quiet joke that Hillenberg left in the background for the adults in the room. Now let's talk about the city itself, because Bikini Bottom is genuinely huge and genuinely detailed. The main road running through the entire city is called Conch Street. If you think about every important location in the classic era of the show, most of them are on or near Conch Street. SpongeBob's house is there, a pineapple at 124 Conch Street. Next door is Squidward's Easter Island head. Next to that is Patrick's Rock. Further down the same road sits the Krusty Krab, and directly across from it is the Chum Bucket. Mrs. Puff's boating school is close by. Conch Street intersects with other roads, including Coral Avenue and Barnacle Road, and stretches all the way from the suburban outskirts of the city into downtown Bikini Bottom. Downtown Bikini Bottom looks, as the show describes it at one point, a lot like Los Angeles. Large buildings, a lot of traffic, a busy skyline. In earlier seasons of the show, if you look at the skyline shots, you can spot a red flower arch in the background that disappears in later episodes. A small detail detail that most people never noticed at all. But the city is far bigger than just downtown and Conch Street. Jellyfish Fields is one of the most iconic locations in the entire show, a vast open area of rock formations and fields where jellyfish live. And when I say vast, I mean it. The episode Born to be Wild revealed that Jellyfish Fields is 50 miles long. Over 4 million jellyfish live there. There are 2 entrances, one at each end, meaning the fields stretch far enough to connect to other areas outside the city entirely. SpongeBob and Patrick go jellyfishing there constantly in the classic era, treating it the way you might treat a local park. Except this park is 50 miles of fields filled with stinging creatures. Goo Lagoon is Bikini Bottom's beach. It's a large underwater lagoon made of a gooey substance rather than regular water. Because Bikini Bottom is already underwater, the beach can't be made of actual water, so the show logically invented an alternative. It's where the residents go to relax, where bodybuilders like Larry the Lobster hang out at Muscle Beach, and where the show set more than a few classic scenes. It sits near Jellyfish Fields, and the 2 locations are within a reasonable distance of each other. The kelp forest sits on the outskirts of the city. It's a dense, dark forest made entirely of towering kelp plants instead of trees, giving it a jungle-like feel. It appears in the episode Club Spongebob, where SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward get launched into it by accident and spend days lost inside. The forest has a meadow clearing in the middle that they use as a camping spot. It's rural in a way that most of Bikini Bottom isn't. Genuinely isolated, genuinely strange. Rock Bottom is one of the most unsettling locations in the classic era. It sits at the bottom of a steep trench far beneath the main city level. The residents of Rock Bottom speak in a way that sounds like regular speech, but with a strange buzzing noise on every word. A linguistic quirk the show never explains. The environment is dark, eerie, and deeply uncomfortable for anyone coming from Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob ends up stranded there in the Season 1 episode of the same name, and the whole thing feels deeply, quietly wrong in a way that stays with you. Sand Mountain is Bikini Bottom's ski resort. The Reef Cinema is its movie theater. There is a concert hall, a hospital, a police department, a boating school, multiple restaurants, a bargain mart that works exactly like a Walmart, and a Weenie Hut Juniors that is specifically for people who aren't tough enough for the salty spittoon. The city has a functioning court system, a jail, and apparently an institution called the Institution for the Criminally Tiny, which housed very small criminals and appears briefly in the SpongeBob movie. Makeout Reef is exactly what it sounds like. It is the local spot where residents go to park their boats and look at the city skyline from a distance. Downtown Bikini Bottom is visible from there. The Sea Needle is the tallest structure in Bikini Bottom, the city's equivalent of the Space Needle in Seattle. It appears in the episode Pre-Hibernation Week and in the video game Battle for Bikini Bottom, sitting just outside downtown. Interestingly, the Sea Needle almost never appears in the city's skyline shots, despite being its tallest structure. Now here is something worth sitting with. According to the episode Whatever Happened to SpongeBob, the actual official population of Bikini Bottom is 538 people. 538. This is a very small number for a city that has a downtown skyline, a functioning government, multiple competing restaurants, a movie theater, an amusement park, a concert hall, and a ski resort. The show treats Bikini Bottom like a busy city with endless crowds of background characters passing through. But officially, as stated in the show itself, fewer than 600 people actually live there. The reason this is interesting is that it makes a kind of accidental emotional sense for the classic era. Bikini Bottom in the early seasons always had a small town feeling despite its city infrastructure. Everybody knows SpongeBob. Everybody has heard of the Krusty Krab. The same background fish appear over and over again in crowds. The Flying Dutchman is a well-known figure. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are celebrities to literally everyone. For a city that visually reads as large and urban, it functions socially like a very small, very connected community where everyone is somehow in everyone else's business. 538 people explains that perfectly. One more thing about the city that most people overlook. The way animals work in Bikini Bottom follows a completely different set of rules than the real ocean. In Bikini Bottom, Sea creatures who are normally prey in the real world live as regular citizens. Fish walk on the street, buy groceries, and go to work. But the show also has actual animals, creatures that exist as pets or wild animals rather than as citizens. Snails meow like cats and are kept as pets. Worms bark like dogs and are also kept as pets. Seahorses behave like horses and can be ridden. Scallops act like seagulls, hanging around Goo Lagoon the way birds hang around a real beach. Jellyfish behave almost exactly like bees. They live in hives, produce jelly the way bees produce honey, and exist in massive, organized colonies in jellyfish fields. The show never directly explains where the line is between a fish who is a citizen and a fish who is just a fish. It's one of those foundational absurdities of the world that the classic era never tried to resolve and never needed to. It just is the way it is, and somehow it works. Here is what all of this adds up to. Bikini Bottom is a city that was built with real thought behind it. The geography was mapped, the districts were named, the population was counted, the rules of nature within it were quietly established over dozens of episodes. The real-world location it sits beneath was chosen deliberately by a man who understood marine biology at a professional level. Most people who watched classic SpongeBob as children were absorbing all of this without knowing it. The city felt real because it was designed with the same care you would give a real place. Not every detail was explained, not every question was answered, but the foundation was solid, and everything built on top of it. Every character, every episode, every running joke had a city worth living in underneath it. And this city has a history that goes back much further than the episodes you watched. Because before Conch Street was Conch Street, before the Krusty Krab was the Krusty Krab, before any of the characters we know were born, something else was here. Something ancient. Something that the show actually bothered to explain, in its own quiet way, across multiple episodes spanning the entire classic era. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The history of Bikini Bottom goes back thousands of years, and the next thing we need to talk about is exactly what happened there, starting at the very beginning of time itself. Section 2. Before the Pineapple. The Ancient History of Bikini Bottom. Most people think of SpongeBob SquarePants as a show that starts with a pineapple falling to the ocean floor, a sponge moving in, and the story beginning there. And in a surface-level way, that is true. But the classic era of SpongeBob quietly did something that most children's cartoons never bothered to do at all. It built a history for its world. A real, documented, episode-confirmed history that stretches back thousands of years before a single Krabby Patty was ever flipped. Bikini Bottom did not just appear one day with a Krusty Krab already on the corner. The ground underneath SpongeBob's pineapple has a past. The ocean floor that Conch Street was built on has been home to creatures for longer than any of the main characters could possibly imagine. And across several classic episodes, the show actually showed us what that past looked like. Tonight, we are going to walk through all of it, from the very bottom of time, all the way up to the moment the story we know begins. Let's start as far back as the show ever went. In Season 1, Episode 14, there is an episode called SB-129. It is one of the strangest and most quietly brilliant episodes in the entire classic era, and most people remember it for its comedy without fully absorbing what it was actually doing. The setup is simple. Squidward, trying to avoid SpongeBob and Patrick, hides inside the Krusty Krab's freezer. He falls asleep in there and wakes up 2,000 years in the future. The city he finds is called Bikini Bottom 2, and it is a chrome, robotic version of the world he knows. Everything is mechanical and sterile. The future version of SpongeBob is a robot called Spongetron, who speaks in an endless cheerful tone and is surrounded by hundreds of identical copies of himself, all named Spongetron as well. The future version of Patrick, Patrone, is similarly copied and robotic. What this established, almost in passing, is that the world of Bikini Bottom continues for at least 2,000 years past the present day. The Krusty Krab still exists in this future, still operational, still relevant. And SpongeBob's character, optimistic, endlessly energetic, slightly overwhelming, apparently gets passed down or preserved across 2 millennia. But the future is not the important part of this episode. After Squidward panics and gets into a time machine to escape the future, he overshoots his destination and lands somewhere unexpected. He arrives in the primordial past of Bikini Bottom, and what he finds there is remarkable. The prehistoric ocean floor is dark and murky. The landscape looks like the Bikini Bottom we know, but stripped of everything built on top of it. No roads, no houses, no restaurants, just the raw ocean floor in its most ancient form. And living on that ocean floor are 2 creatures who are unmistakably the prehistoric ancestors of Spongebob and Patrick. They are not given names in this episode. They look like ape-like versions of their modern counterparts, draped in loincloths, communicating in grunts and physical expression. They are curious about Squidward in the way that someone who has never seen anything like him would be. They follow him around, they imitate him, and they are endlessly distracted by a jellyfish that keeps floating nearby. Here is where the episode does something genuinely funny, but also quietly meaningful in terms of lore. Squidward, trying to get some peace and quiet so he can play his clarinet, teaches the 2 prehistoric creatures how to jellyfish. He tears pieces from their loincloths, fashions them into nets, and demonstrates catching the jellyfish and releasing it. The 2 creatures take to it immediately and are absolutely thrilled. What this moment is saying, if you take it seriously for even a second, is that the sport of jellyfishing, the hobby that Spongebob and Patrick love more than almost anything in the modern era, was accidentally invented by Squidward himself, thousands of years in the past. Squidward, who finds jellyfishing pointless and annoying, is canonically the reason it exists at all. The episode does not linger on this. It moves on quickly, but the implication is there, and it is canon. Squidward eventually escapes the prehistoric era, and, after bouncing through time a bit more, arrives somewhere even stranger. An endless white void with no features at all. Disembodied voices repeat the word alone over and over. Squidward, who spends most of his life wishing he could get away from Spongebob and Patrick, finds himself completely and totally alone. And rather than finding peace in it, he breaks down completely. He cries. He begs the time machine to take him home. He admits, out loud, that he even misses Spongebob. The machine responds to his words and brings him back to the present. That detail, that the time machine brought him home the moment he admitted he missed someone, is the kind of quiet, emotional writing that made the classic era so much richer than it needed to be. But we will come back to Squidward's inner life in a later section. For now, the important thing is what SB-129 established. The ancestors of Spongebob and Patrick were living on the Bikini Bottom ocean floor in the prehistoric past, and that past was documented and confirmed. The prehistoric era was also visited in another classic episode called Ugh, which aired as a special. In this one, we are introduced by name to 3 prehistoric Bikini Bottom residents who are the confirmed ancestors of Spongebob, Patrick, and Squidward. Spongebob's ancestor is called Spongegar. Patrick's ancestor is called Patar. Squidward's ancestor is called Squog. The episode shows them living in the most primitive possible version of Bikini Bottom, discovering fire and behaving in the ways you would expect from creatures at that stage of development. What matters for lore purposes is that this episode confirms something SB-129 had only implied. These are not random prehistoric creatures. These are specifically the family lines of the main characters, confirmed by name, going back to the beginning of the world. The Spongebob of thousands of years ago and the Spongebob living in a pineapple on Conch Street are connected by a direct bloodline that the show actually bothered to establish. That is a level of world building that most cartoons simply do not bother with. Now we move forward through time, out of the prehistoric era and into a period that is much more structured, into what the show called the medieval era. In the episode Dunces and Dragons, Spongebob and Patrick are accidentally transported back in time through a jousting accident and arrive in a period called Bikini Bottomshire. This is the medieval version of Bikini Bottom, and it is a fully formed kingdom with a royal family, subjects, a court, villains, and its own specific history. The ruler of Bikini Bottomshire is a king called King Krabs. He is the ancestor of Eugene H. Krabs, the Mr. Krabs we know from the modern day. He looks recognizable, the same crab body, the same basic features, but wearing royal robes and sitting on a throne. He has a daughter called Princess Pearl, who is the ancestor of Pearl Krabs, Mr. Krabs' daughter in the present day. She is, like modern Pearl, a whale. The family line connecting a crab to a whale is already established this far back in the timeline. The villain of this era is Plankton Amor. He is the ancestor of the Plankton we know, a tiny, one-eyed creature with an obsession with power and control. Where modern Plankton wants the Krabby Patty formula, Plankton Amor wants to rule over the kingdom. He commands a fire-breathing jellyfish that he uses as a weapon, and he kidnaps Princess Pearl and holds her hostage in his tower. SpongeBob and Patrick arrive in this era and are immediately treated as special. According to Princess Pearl, a prophecy had long existed that two heroes would arrive and save the kingdom. SpongeBob and Patrick, as absurd as this sounds, were the prophecy. They fulfill it. They defeat Plankton Amor and rescue Princess Pearl. What happens next is the piece of this episode that matters most for the larger lore of the show. After the kingdom is saved and a parade is held in SpongeBob and Patrick's honor, King Krabs invents the Krabby Patty. He creates it in celebration, and from that moment, according to the story, the Krabby Patty recipe is passed down through the Krabs family from generation to generation. The formula that Plankton spends the entire modern era trying to steal has its origin here, in a medieval kingdom, created by a king crab to celebrate a victory. The rivalry between the Krabs family and the ancestor of Plankton, the obsession with a recipe, the whale connected to a crab through a family line that stretches back to this period. All of it was already in motion in the medieval era. The stories we watched every day as children were not the beginning of something. They were the latest chapter in something much, much older. Moving further forward through time, we reach the American frontier era, the Wild West. In the episode Pest of the West, we are introduced to SpongeBuck SquarePants, the ancestor of SpongeBob who lived in the mid-1800s. Specifically, the episode places SpongeBuck in the year 1882 in a town called Deadeye Gulch. Deadeye Gulch is the previous name for what would eventually become Bikini Bottom. Deadeye Gulch was a frontier town being terrorized by a villain called Deadeye Plankton. He is the western ancestor of Plankton, following the same pattern the show established with Plankton Amor. Every era of Bikini Bottom's history has a plankton in it, and every plankton in history is causing problems for the local population and the ancestors of the Krabs family. SpongeBuck SquarePants saves Deadeye Gulch. He defeats Deadeye Plankton. The town is freed, and after his victory, the residents of Deadeye Gulch celebrate him. And among those residents are the Western ancestors of several other characters we know, including a Western version of Mrs. Puff called Pauline Puff, and a Western Squidward called Hopalong Squidward. What this episode quietly confirmed is something the show had been building across several years by that point. The same families have been living in the same place, fighting the same basic conflict for a very, very long time. The Krabs family runs things, the Plankton family causes trouble, the SquarePants family saves the day, the Squidward family stands nearby looking miserable. It has always been this way. Deadeye Gulch eventually became Bikini Bottom. The same ground, the same ocean floor, the same location, just with a new name, new buildings, and a new chapter of the same ongoing story. Now we come forward to something closer to the present. Before SpongeBob was born, before the Krusty Krab existed, before any of the events of the show began, a significant moment happened in the early 1980s. In 1981, a sporting event was established in Bikini Bottom called the Fry Cook Games. Think of it like the Olympics, but for fry cooks. And one of the earliest documented competitions involved two participants whose names you will recognize, Eugene Krabs and Sheldon Plankton. At these games, in the recorded history of the event, Krabs won gold in a pickle lifting challenge, while Plankton beat him in an onion ring routine. This detail matters because it places Krabs and Plankton in direct competition with each other in a public, formal setting well before the present timeline of the show. Their rivalry was not born overnight. It was already visible enough to be documented in a competitive sporting event that the entire city apparently attended. By the time SpongeBob SquarePants was born on July 14th, 1986, the world he was born into already had thousands of years of history underneath it. The ocean floor had been home to his ancestors since the prehistoric era. The family line of his employer had been running a version of the Krabby Patty business since the medieval period. The rivalry between the Krabs family and the Plankton family had been running even longer than that. The town had already been saved multiple times by members of his own bloodline. SpongeBob moved into his pineapple and started work at the Krusty Krab without knowing any of this. To him, every day was a fresh start. Every morning was the best morning. Every shift was an opportunity to make the best Krabby Patties possible. But the ground beneath his feet remembered everything. This is what makes the classic era of SpongeBob so unusual when you sit with it properly. It was not a show that existed only in the present. It built backwards as well as forwards. The creators actually sat down and decided what this place looked like in the medieval period. They named the ancestors. They gave them specific stories. They connected the bloodlines. They traced the origin of the show's most important object, the Krabby Patty formula, to a celebration held by a king crab centuries ago. Most cartoons do not do this. Most cartoons are not interested in what was here before the story started. But SpongeBob was different because it was built by someone who thought like a scientist as much as a storyteller. Someone who understood that the most believable worlds are the ones that feel like they existed before you arrived. And now that we know what existed before the story we know began, we can turn our attention to the single most important moment in the modern history of Bikini Bottom. The moment that set everything in motion, the friendship that became a war, the recipe that was born in a fight. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because two best friends grew up together on this ancient ocean floor, and the day their friendship ended is the reason the world of SpongeBob SquarePants works the way it does. Section 3. Best Friends, Worst Enemies. The Origin of Krabs and Plankton. If you had to pick the single relationship that drives the entire engine of classic SpongeBob, most people would say SpongeBob and Patrick. And that makes sense. They are the heart of the show. But the relationship that actually makes the world of Bikini Bottom run, the one that creates the central conflict of nearly every episode, the one that explains why the Krusty Krab exists, why the Chum Bucket exists, why the Krabby Patty formula is locked in a safe, why Plankton has spent his entire adult life obsessed with a burger recipe. That relationship is the one between Eugene Krabs and Sheldon Plankton. And the origin of that relationship is one of the most genuinely sad stories the show ever told. It was revealed in the episode Friend or Foe, which aired as the first episode of Season 5. In it, SpongeBob asks Mr. Krabs why he and Plankton hate each other so much. Mr. Krabs tells his version of the story, Plankton tells his version, and then Karen, Plankton's computer wife, tells the real version. What Karen reveals is a story that reframes everything you thought you knew about the two most important business rivals in Bikini Bottom. Krabs and Plankton were born at the same hospital, on the same day. From the very first moment of their lives, they were connected. And as they grew up, that connection deepened into a genuine friendship. The kind of friendship that forms between two people who feel like the rest of the world does not quite have a place for them. Krabs grew up poor. His family had almost nothing. His clothes, at some point in his childhood, were made from materials found in the garbage. He was the kid that other kids looked down on because of what he had, or more specifically, what he did not have. Plankton, on the other hand, was small and considered strange. He was intelligent in a way that made other kids uncomfortable, and he was mocked for it. Between the two of them, they formed a friendship built on a shared understanding of what it felt like to be on the outside of everything. The show gives us a specific memory from their childhood that illustrates this perfectly. One day, Krabs found a penny at a carnival. He spent it on a balloon for Plankton, not on himself, on his friend. It is a small detail, but it tells you something important about who Krabs was before money became everything to him. There was a version of Eugene Krabs who used his only coin to make someone else happy. As they got older, the two of them found a common focus. They wanted to go into the food business. They wanted to make something people actually wanted to eat. And they wanted to build it themselves. The target was clear. A local restaurant called Stinky's Burgers, run by a man named Stinky, who was deeply unpleasant to anyone he considered beneath him. Stinky's was popular with the local children, despite having genuinely terrible food and being located in a landfill, simply because it was the only option available. Stinky refused to serve Krabs and Plankton equally. He looked at them and told them that freaks like them were bad for business. That moment of rejection was the spark. The two friends decided they would go into the burger business themselves, create something better, and put Stinky out of business. They called their venture Plabs Burgers, a combination of their two names. They set up at the local dump, and then, conveniently, the health department shut down Stinky's Burgers. Suddenly, the local children had nowhere else to go. Plabs Burgers became the only option by default, and business came whether the food was good or not. But the food was not good. Nobody wanted to try it. The children who came were forced to eat there simply because they had no alternative, and they were not happy about it. This is where the two friends began to pull in different directions. Plankton looked at the situation and saw an opportunity for power. He told Krabs they should use the restaurant as leverage, use the fact that they were the only option to control the customers, to make them dependent. Krabs disagreed completely. Krabs wanted to make food that people actually enjoyed. He wanted customers who came back because they wanted to, not because they had no choice. He believed the goal was to genuinely satisfy people. It was a fundamental difference in what each of them thought a business was for. And it was the first real crack in a friendship that had lasted their entire childhood. They kept working together, trying to improve their recipe. They built a patty that they believed in, even if no one else had tried it yet. And then Old Man Jenkins walked through the door. He was the first customer willing to actually eat one of their burgers. He took a bite, collapsed, and had to be carried out. He had been poisoned by the patty. In the chaos that followed, Krabs and Plankton turned on each other. Each of them accused the other of putting something wrong into the recipe. Each of them was convinced the other had deliberately ruined it. The argument escalated quickly and completely, going from an accusation about a burger into everything they had ever held back from each other. The differences in what they wanted, the directions they had always been pulling in without admitting it. At the peak of the argument, they both grabbed the recipe at the same time. They pulled, and the paper tore in half. Plankton walked out with one half of the recipe. Krabs was left standing in the dump with the other half. Here is where something remarkable happened, and it is something the show treated as almost accidental. When Plankton stormed out, the force of the argument had knocked items off a nearby shelf. Various ingredients had tumbled down and mixed themselves into the patty batter that was sitting on the counter. Krabs, alone now, looked at what had happened. He tasted the result. It was extraordinary. Whatever combination had fallen into that batter had created something genuinely delicious. The Krabby Patty formula was born, not out of careful planning or culinary skill. It was born out of the chaos of a friendship ending. A shelf was knocked over, ingredients fell, and one of the most beloved fictional foods in the history of animation came into existence by pure accident in the middle of the worst moment of Eugene Krabs' life. Krabs kept the formula. Plankton left with his half of the torn recipe, which, when he read it properly, contained only a small amount of usable information. The final line of his half read, "and a pinch of chum." That was it. That was all Plankton had. A pinch of chum. He took that fragment and built the chum bucket around it. His restaurant, located directly across the street from what would eventually become the Krusty Krab, was based entirely on that one incomplete ingredient. And chum, in the context of food, is genuinely unpleasant. It is the kind of thing that repels rather than attracts. The Chum Bucket's food is universally described throughout the show as inedible, disgusting, and actively harmful to anyone who eats it. Every single dish Plankton has ever served traces back to that one word on the bottom of a torn piece of paper. Plankton went on to open the Chum Bucket. Krabs refined his formula, bought a failing retirement home called the Rusty Krab, changed the name to the Krusty Krab, and turned it into the most successful restaurant in Bikini Bottom. And from that point forward, the two former best friends became the defining rivals of the entire underwater city, permanently separated by a street, a recipe, and a friendship that fell apart over a disagreement about what a business is actually. 4. There is a detail about what Plankton kept that is worth sitting with, because it adds a layer to this story that the show itself never explicitly stated, but that many people have connected over the years. The word chum has more than one meaning. In the context of fishing and ocean life, chum refers to fish scraps and other unpleasant things used as bait. That is the meaning Plankton used when he built his restaurant. But the word chum also has a second meaning. In older language, particularly the kind of seafaring language the show often played with, chum means friend. A chum is a companion, someone close to you. The final ingredient on Plankton's half of the recipe was a pinch of chum, and all he ever used it for was a restaurant that nobody would eat at. But if the other meaning of the word is the one that was actually intended, if what was written on Plankton's half of the recipe was a reminder that a pinch of friendship was the missing piece, then Plankton has been sitting across the street from the answer to his problem for his entire adult life, and he has never been able to see it. He needed a friend. He had one, and he chose power over him. After the split, Krabs built the Krusty Krab slowly and carefully. He kept the formula locked away and protected it with the same intensity that he had once protected his friendship with Plankton. Except now, the obsession had transferred from a person to a piece of paper. The Krabby Patty became the most beloved food in Bikini Bottom. The restaurant became an institution. And Plankton, watching from across the street as day after day passed with not a single customer walking through the doors of the Chum Bucket, began to develop the plan that would define the rest of his life. He was going to get that formula back. He was going to take it from Krabs, reproduce the Krabby Patty, and finally have what was taken from him on the day the recipe tore. What is striking about this, when you step back from it, is how much of Plankton's entire identity was shaped by a single afternoon in a dump. His restaurant, his mission, his relationship with Krabs, his obsession, all of it traces back to one fight, one torn piece of paper, and one half of a recipe that was never going to be enough. And Krabs carries his own version of that history. The formula he built his empire on was an accident. The money he became obsessed with was never the point when he was young. He spent his only coin on a balloon for his best friend. The man who would go on to sell Spongebob to the Flying Dutchman for 62 cents once used his last penny to make someone else smile. Both of them lost something the day they tore that recipe apart. Neither of them ever fully recovered from it. And for the rest of the show's classic era, they played out the consequences of that one moment across hundreds of episodes, never quite able to let it go. The Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket were not just rival restaurants. They were the physical result of a friendship that broke. Every time Plankton tried to steal the formula, every time Krabs threw him back across the street, the show was replaying a version of the same argument that started in a dump with a poisoned customer and ended with a torn piece of paper. Knowing this changes how the whole show feels. Every episode where Plankton sneaks into the Krusty Krab dressed as a pepper shaker or builds a robot version of Mr. Krabs or crawls inside SpongeBob's brain. All of those schemes look different when you know they started here. When you know that the two of them once sat in a dump together and shared the same dream. When you know that the rivalry everyone laughs at was once a friendship that a balloon and a penny were part of. The show trusted its audience enough to plant this backstory in Season 5 and let it quietly recolor everything that came before and after it. And it did. Once you know the origin, you cannot watch a single Plankton episode the same way again. But Plankton's history with the formula is only half the story of what that recipe has meant to Bikini Bottom. Because across the years of the classic era, Plankton launched scheme after scheme after scheme to get it back, each one more creative and more desperate than the last. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the full list of those schemes is something we need to walk through carefully, because it reveals something about Plankton that goes even deeper than a childhood friendship gone wrong. Section 4. Plan Z and every plan before it. Plankton's endless war. When you watch Plankton try to steal the Krabby Patty formula in a classic Spongebob episode, the easy thing to do is laugh, and the show absolutely wants you to laugh. The schemes are ridiculous. The disguises are absurd. The failures are immediate and total. Plankton gets flicked out of the Krusty Krab like a crumb, lands in the dirt outside the chum bucket, and the episode moves on. But if you sit with the full picture of what Plankton actually attempted across the classic era, all of it, laid out in order, something shifts. The comedy is still there, but underneath it is the portrait of a person who has devoted his entire existence to a single goal and has never once come close to achieving it. A person whose every waking hour, whose every invention, whose every relationship is organized around one obsession that began on the day his only friendship ended. Plankton's schemes are not just funny, they are the biography of a man who does not know how to stop. Before we get into the specific plans, there is a piece of information from the first SpongeBob movie that reframes the entire history of Plankton's efforts in a way that is genuinely staggering. At the beginning of the movie, just before Plankton launches his big plan, he reviews all the previous attempts he has made to steal the formula. He refers to them as plans A through Y, 25 separate documented plans, all of which had already failed before the movie even starts. The movie's marketing campaign actually published the full list of these plans, and Plan A is exactly what you would expect from someone who was once friends with the person he is now stealing from. Plan A was simply this: request that Krabs hand over the formula willingly. That was the first plan. Ask nicely. It did not work. And rather than accepting that outcome and moving on with his life, Plankton moved to Plan B, and then Plan C, and then all the way through the alphabet. 25 consecutive failures, each one presumably more complicated than the last, before he arrived at the movie's central scheme, which he called Plan Z. Plan Z, as Plankton described it, was the most evil plan he had ever constructed. He even mentioned it was lemon-scented, which is a detail that makes no practical sense and is completely perfect. What this timeline means is that by the time the first SpongeBob movie takes place, Plankton has been actively and deliberately trying to steal the formula for long enough to burn through an entire alphabet of schemes. 25 failed attempts before the one the movie focuses on. 25. Now let's look at what some of those attempts actually looked like in the classic episodes, because the variety and creativity of Plankton's methods across seasons 1 through 3 is genuinely remarkable when you lay them out. In his very first appearance in the show, Season 1's episode simply called Plankton, he went directly for SpongeBob's brain. His plan was to climb inside SpongeBob's head through his ear, take control of his body from the inside, and walk him over to the analyzer machine that would break down the formula from a Krabby Patty. He got inside. He got control. He got SpongeBob moving toward the machine. He was moments away from actually succeeding. Then, SpongeBob started talking to the patty. He told it that he loved it, that it was the most beautiful thing he had ever made, that he was proud of it. And Plankton, sitting inside SpongeBob's head, was so overwhelmed by the warmth and sincerity of what he was hearing that he jumped out voluntarily. He could not stay in the presence of that much genuine feeling. He failed his very first scheme by being emotionally unable to handle SpongeBob's love for his work. That is the first plan the audience ever saw, and it established something important. Plankton's greatest obstacle has never been SpongeBob's intelligence or Krabs' security measures. His greatest obstacle is his own inability to connect with the thing that makes the Krabby Patty what it is. In the Season 1 episode, Culture Shock, during a talent show at the Krusty Krab, Plankton disguised himself as a magician and performed on stage. He asked for a volunteer from the audience, grabbed a Krabby Patty from a customer in the process of his act, and tried to run out with it. Mr. Krabs stopped him immediately. Plankton attempted a dramatic escape inside a burst of flames and ended up burning himself instead. In FUN, Plankton tried a completely different approach. He decided that rather than stealing from SpongeBob, he would befriend him. He presented himself as lonely and misunderstood, and SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, took him at his word completely. They spent a genuine day together, They sang a song. They went to the movies. SpongeBob was fully invested in the idea that Plankton was his friend, and that the friendship was real. It was not real. Plankton was using the friendship to get close enough to steal a patty, and when he finally made his move at the movie theater, he failed anyway. But what made the episode land harder than a typical Plankton scheme was the moment near the end when SpongeBob, having figured out what was happening, looked genuinely hurt. Not angry, hurt. And Plankton, for just a moment, looked like he felt something about that. The show did not push that moment far. It moved on. But it was there. In imitation Krabs, Plankton built a full robotic replica of Mr. Krabs and operated it from inside the machine, planning to get SpongeBob to reveal the formula by trusting the fake Krabs. The robot was convincing enough to fool SpongeBob initially. Plankton had SpongeBob walking toward the formula. Then the real Mr. Krabs showed up. SpongeBob, confused about which one was real, was given a challenge, a series of tasks to determine which Krabs was genuine. SpongeBob complied enthusiastically with the tasks, putting both versions of Krabs through a long and exhausting process before accidentally triggering the robot's self-destruct mechanism by inserting a coin into a slot. The robot exploded. Plankton failed. The coin slot self-destruct detail is worth noting because it was Plankton himself who apparently designed and built that robot, which means Plankton built a self-destruct button into his own disguise machine that could be triggered by the one thing Mr. Krabs is most associated with. He essentially built his own failure into the plan. In Welcome to the Chum Bucket, Plankton used a different method entirely. He won SpongeBob in a card game against Mr. Krabs. This is canon. Mr. Krabs bet SpongeBob's contract in a card game and lost, and SpongeBob was legally required to go work at the Chum Bucket. Plankton's plan was that with SpongeBob as his employee, he could get SpongeBob to cook Krabby Patties for him and have the formula that way without ever needing to steal it directly. SpongeBob went to the Chum Bucket. He cooked. The patties were terrible. Not because SpongeBob was trying to fail, but because SpongeBob was so miserable being away from the Krusty Krab that the food reflected it. He could not perform without the environment he belonged in. Plankton eventually had to let him go, having gained nothing. This episode quietly confirmed something the show had been suggesting all along. The Krabby Patty is not just a recipe. It is connected to the person making it and the place it is made in. Even with the exact same cook, the product was different. The formula was not enough on its own. Moving into Season 2, the schemes continued with the same relentless creativity. In the episode Plankton, which despite the name was a Season 2 episode rather than the pilot, Plankton entered SpongeBob's mind again, this time going deeper, trying to extract the formula from SpongeBob's memory rather than controlling his body. He found himself inside a version of SpongeBob's consciousness that was overwhelmingly warm, cheerful, and full of love for everything around it. The experience was so positive and so foreign to him that he was unable to function inside it. He left without the formula. Plankton has now, at this point in the show, tried twice to use SpongeBob's own brain as a vehicle for stealing the formula, and both times, SpongeBob's internal emotional world defeated him. In the episode Spy Buddies from a later season, Plankton used advanced surveillance equipment. In Shellback Shenanigans, he disguised himself as Gary the Snail. He disguised himself as Sandy after obtaining her fur. He disguised himself as a stack of dollar bills to attract Krabs. He pretended to be a door-to-door salesman. He posed as a Sweetie Patrol girl selling cookies. He built a robot version of SpongeBob and tried to use it as an infiltrator. He attempted to go back in time using a time machine and ended up in prehistoric Bikini Bottom, where he was immediately chased by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That last one is worth repeating. Plankton built a working time machine, traveled back to the prehistoric past, and his immediate response to arriving in the ancient world was to try to steal the formula. In the prehistoric past, where the formula did not exist yet, the machine had taken him too far back. He was chased by a dinosaur and returned empty-handed. Throughout all of this, there is a detail about Plankton's operation that the show confirmed and that changes the credit balance of the whole situation considerably. Most of Plankton's plans were not his own ideas. Karen, his computer wife, was the one who generated and provided the majority of his schemes. Plankton typically took all the credit for the plans, presented them as his own brilliant strategy, and then executed them badly enough to fail despite having a genuinely capable strategic mind behind them. Karen was smarter than Plankton. She was better at planning than he was. She was more composed, more analytical, and more likely to correctly identify the flaw in an approach before it collapsed. And she spent her entire existence feeding ideas to someone who dismissed her contributions and then blamed her when things went wrong. Their relationship is strange and layered in ways the show only occasionally made explicit. Karen cared about Plankton in her own way. Plankton depended on Karen completely in his own way. But the dynamic was never one of equals, and the show was quietly aware of that imbalance throughout the classic era. By the time the first SpongeBob movie arrived in 2004, Plankton had burned through all 25 previous plans and landed on Plan Z. Plan Z worked. It actually worked. Plankton stole King Neptune's crown, framed Mr. Krabs for the theft, got Krabs frozen by Neptune, took control of the Krusty Krab, got his hands on the formula, distributed mind control helmets across all of Bikini Bottom, and had the entire population under his command. For a brief period, Plankton won. He had everything. He called himself the ruler of Bikini Bottom and stood on top of the Krusty Krab, while the city below him was filled with people wearing his helmets. And then SpongeBob and Patrick came back from their journey. SpongeBob sang a rock song that destroyed the helmets. The population turned on Plankton, and he was arrested. He went from ruler of the entire city to in handcuffs in the time it took for a song to play. There is one more angle to all of this that brings everything full circle back to the origin story from the previous section. A popular theory that emerged from years of watching these episodes connects the word on Plankton's half of the torn recipe to everything he has failed to do. His half said a pinch of chum, a pinch of friend, and across every single scheme he ever ran, the one thing Plankton consistently avoided was genuine connection. He used SpongeBob's friendship as a trick in FUN. He dismissed Karen's contributions while depending on them entirely. He treated every relationship as a tool for the plan. The show confirmed through its writer that there is no meat in a Krabby Patty. The formula is vegetarian. The patty is not made from anything you would expect. Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, joked in an interview that the Krabby Patty is probably hummus. The point is that the actual contents of the formula have never been the real mystery. The mystery is why the patty tastes the way it does when SpongeBob makes it, in that building, with that level of care. And Plankton has never been able to replicate that, not once. Not even when he had the formula in his hands, because the thing that makes the Krabby Patty what it is has never been something that could be written on a piece of paper. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The man who built the Krusty Krab on the foundation of that recipe understood that instinctively, even if he never said it out loud. And his story, where he came from, how he got there, what he lost along the way, is the next thing we need to sit with properly. Because Eugene Krabs is a far more complicated person than his obsession with money lets on. Section 5. Armor Abs Krabs. The real history of Mr. Krabs. Most people who watched classic SpongeBob as children understood Mr. Krabs as one thing: the greedy crab who owned the Krusty Krab and cared more about money than anything else in the world. And that reading is not wrong. The show gave you plenty of evidence for it. He once sold SpongeBob to the Flying Dutchman for 62 cents. He charged his own employees for the act of breathing while on the clock. He retrieved the fragments of a shredded dollar bill from inside a blender because he could not bear to lose even the pieces. The greed is real. The show never asked you to ignore it. But underneath the greed is a biography that most people never fully assembled, because the show scattered the pieces of it across years of episodes without ever sitting down to tell it all at once. When you gather those pieces together and lay them out in order, the portrait that emerges is of someone whose obsession with money was not something he was born with. It was something that grew out of a life that gave him very specific reasons to be afraid of having nothing. Eugene Harold Krabs was born on November 30th, 1942, and from the very beginning, he did not have much. His childhood was defined by poverty, in a way that the show referenced directly more than once. His clothes during his early years were made from materials found in the garbage, not bought cheap, not hand-me-downs, literally constructed from what could be pulled out of the trash. He was the kid that other children looked down on, and he knew it, and he carried that awareness with him everywhere he went. The show gave us one specific memory from his childhood that tells you almost everything you need to know about who Krabs was before money became his entire identity. In the episode My Pretty Seahorse, Krabs told Spongebob a story about his father giving him $1 when he was 5 years old. He described loving that dollar the way you would love a sibling. He said it felt like having a brother. And then one hot day at the beach, he spent it on a soda. He regretted it immediately. And he never forgot it. That is the origin of the obsession. Not greed for its own sake, but the memory of having one thing that felt like security, and then watching it disappear in a single moment for something that lasted 5 minutes and was gone. The soda was finished, the dollar was gone, and the feeling that came after it, the hollowness of having had something and lost it, apparently stayed with him for the rest of his life. As a young man, Krabs went into the Navy. This is confirmed across multiple episodes of the classic era. He served, and during his time in the service, he earned the nickname Armor Abs Krabs, a detail mentioned in the show that suggests he was genuinely physically capable during his military years. He won 5 Golden Claws in the Navy, an award mentioned in the episode SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, which tells you he was not just present during his service, but was recognized for being good at something. His actual roles in the Navy were less glamorous than the nickname might suggest. He served as chief janitor on a ship called the SS Gourmet, and as head chef on a ship called the SS Diarrhea. The second name is the show doing what the show does, but the detail beneath the joke is real. Krabs was cooking during his Navy years. The skill that would eventually make him a successful restaurant owner was being developed in a military kitchen on a ship in the middle of the ocean. After the war ended, Krabs came home, and according to the show, what followed was a period of deep and serious depression. The episode documentation describes him as becoming secluded and withdrawn, stuck in a low point that seemed like it had no end. The man who would eventually become the most successful businessman in Bikini Bottom spent a significant portion of his early adult life unable to find a direction. What pulled him out of it was a building. He found a rundown, failing retirement home called the Rusty Krab. He bought it, and then he made a decision that changed everything. He converted it into a restaurant. He kept the basic shape of the name, added a K to the front of Rusty, and changed the C of Krab to a K. The Rusty Krab became the Krusty Krab. He took the formula that had been born by accident in a dump during the worst argument of his life and built a restaurant around it. The Krusty Krab was not designed or built from scratch. It was a retirement home that was converted into a fast food restaurant by a depressed Navy veteran who needed something to do with his hands. That is what the most beloved restaurant in Bikini Bottom actually is at its foundation. Somewhere in the years between his Navy service and the present timeline of the show, Krabs got married. His wife was a sperm whale, and at some point, they had a daughter together, Pearl, who is also a sperm whale. Pearl's mother has never appeared in the show. She is referenced in small ways across a few episodes, enough to confirm she existed, enough to confirm she was a whale, but never shown and never explained in any detail. What happened to her is one of the show's longest-running unanswered questions. Whether she passed away or the marriage ended some other way, the show never said. What it left behind is a Mr. Krabs, who is, for the entirety of the classic era, a single father raising a teenage daughter on his own. Stephen Hillenberg, when asked about the fact that Pearl is a whale while her father is a crab, gave a simple answer. He wanted every character in the main cast to be a different kind of sea creature. Pearl being a whale while Krabs is a crab was not a mystery he intended to solve. He simply wanted variety. The SpongeBob trivia book confirmed that Pearl takes after her mother, which established that the whale mother was real and that Pearl's appearance comes from her. But what Hillenberg's simple, creative explanation does not erase is what Pearl's existence means in the context of Krabs' life. He is a crab who married a whale, had a daughter, lost the wife somewhere along the way, and has been raising that daughter alone while running a restaurant and fighting off a former best friend who shows up every few days trying to steal his most valuable possession. The greed and the cheapness that define how most people see Mr. Krabs exist on top of all of that. Pearl herself is one of the show's most quietly interesting background details. She is a teenage sperm whale attending high school in Bikini Bottom, and her relationship with her father is one of the show's most honest parent-child dynamics in the classic era. Krabs loves Pearl. That part is clear and consistent across every episode she appears in. He dotes on her, worries about her, and is willing to go to lengths for her happiness that he would not go to for almost anyone or anything else. When Pearl's prom date stood her up, Krabs volunteered to take her himself. When he could not afford to take her properly, he arranged for Spongebob to go with her instead. And when they came home and Pearl was happy, Krabs thanked Spongebob with a sincerity you rarely saw from him in other contexts. But his cheapness creates a constant friction in their relationship that Pearl finds genuinely exhausting. On her 16th birthday, in the episode Whale of a Birthday, Krabs cut every possible corner for her party, despite knowing how much it meant to her. The gifts he gave her across her childhood included used batteries and the infamous squeaky boots. Boots he had originally given to SpongeBob and taken back. Pearl's birthdays and the disappointments they contained became a running theme, because they illustrated the one place where Krabs' love and his cheapness came into direct conflict with each other, and the cheapness often won even when he knew better. Pearl wanted to fit in with her peers. Being a sperm whale surrounded by fish made that inherently complicated, because her size alone set her apart in ways she had no control over. The show treated this with more sensitivity than it needed to. Pearl's discomfort with standing out, her frustration with a father who embarrassed her, her genuine affection for him underneath all of it. These were written with real care. Her mother's absence was never addressed in a way that Pearl brought up directly, but it sat in the background of their relationship, the way absences tend to. Two people alone together, one of them a crab who built everything he had from nothing, the other a whale who inherited his world without choosing it. One more thread in Krabs' history that the show confirmed, and that adds depth to everything else, is his family line. We established in the previous section on Bikini Bottom's ancient history that his ancestor King Krabs ruled Bikini Bottomshire in the medieval era and first created the Krabby Patty recipe. But the show also gave Krabs a grandfather in the more recent past, a pirate named Grandpa Redbeard. In the episode Grandpappy the Pirate, this ancestor was revealed to be a genuine pirate who took pride in his criminal seafaring history. And when Krabs finally confessed to him that he was not a pirate but a restaurant owner, Grandpa Redbeard's response was to be impressed rather than disappointed. He looked at what Krabs charged for food at the Krusty Krab, looked at the way he extracted money from his customers through pricing and manipulation, and decided that Krabs was actually more of a pirate than he had given him credit for. It was a joke. But it was also the show telling you something real about where the obsession with money came from. It was in the family. Not as poverty-driven anxiety the way Krabs carried it, but as a way of moving through the world. A relationship with taking and keeping that had been passed down through generations of his family line and landed in him in a particular form shaped by his particular life. What you get when you put all of this together is a character who is genuinely funny and genuinely problematic in his behavior, but who arrived at both of those things through a life that made a specific kind of sense. A poor childhood, a Navy career, a depression after the war, a retirement home turned restaurant, a marriage to a whale that ended without explanation, a daughter he loves imperfectly, a formula he built an empire on that was born from the worst day of his life. The greed is the armor. The Krusty Krab is the fortress. The formula is the thing he guards so fiercely because it is the only thing that connects the man he became to the boy who spent his only dollar on a soda and spent the rest of his life making sure he would never feel that empty again. He is not a simple character. He was never a simple character. The show just built him in pieces, spread across years of episodes, trusting that the audience would eventually be old enough to see what they were looking at. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And sitting right next to him in that restaurant, day after day, was the character who made everything Krabs built actually work. Someone who was not supposed to be there at all. Someone who moved into a pineapple one day and became, without quite meaning to, the most important person in the whole city. His story goes further back than you might think, and his life is more complicated than his smile lets on. Section 6. Help Wanted. SpongeBob's life, relationships, and what he actually is. There is a version of SpongeBob SquarePants that most people think they know completely. The yellow sponge, the big eyes, the laugh. The fry cook who loves his job and annoys his neighbor, and goes jellyfishing on weekends with his best friend. That version is real and it is accurate, but it is also only the surface of a character who, when you look at him properly, is carrying a lot more than his smile suggests. SpongeBob SquarePants is a fully grown adult. He lives alone. He pays rent on a house he maintains himself. He holds a professional job that he has been doing long enough to become genuinely exceptional at it. He has a pet he is responsible for. He has a social life, a hobby, a morning routine, and a set of fears and anxieties that run beneath the cheerfulness like a current that the show only occasionally let rise to the surface. He was also never supposed to be called SpongeBob. When Steven Hillenberg first developed the character, the name he had in mind was Spongeboy. Spongeboy SquarePants. The character was the same. A sea sponge with a rectangular shape, an optimistic personality, and a passion for the ocean world around him. But when Hillenberg took the show to Nickelodeon, and they began preparing to produce it, they discovered that the name Spongeboy was already trademarked. Someone else owned it. They could not use it. So the name was changed. Spongeboy became SpongeBob. The rest of the character stayed exactly as Hillenberg had built him. This detail matters because of what it tells you about the design of the character. Hillenberg was a marine biologist. He understood what an actual sea sponge looked like. Round, irregular, organic, nothing like what ended up on screen. He made a deliberate choice to design SpongeBob to look like a kitchen sponge instead of a real sea sponge. He wanted the character to be immediately recognizable to children, and a rectangular yellow kitchen sponge was something every child had seen in their home. The scientific reality was set aside in favor of something more relatable. SpongeBob SquarePants was born on July 14th, 1986. His address is 124 Conch Street, Bikini Bottom, Pacific Ocean. He lives in a pineapple. The show never fully explained why the pineapple is there or how it came to be on the ocean floor, and that is entirely consistent with how Bikini Bottom works. Some things simply are the way they are, and the world around them accepts it without question. His family line, as we established in the section on Bikini Bottom's ancient history, stretches back thousands of years. Sponge Gar in the prehistoric era. SpongeBuck SquarePants in the American frontier era of 1882, and Spongetron in the robotic future 2,000 years from now. The SquarePants name carries through every era of the show's documented timeline, and SpongeBob sits in the middle of it, the current chapter of a very long story. His parents, Harold and Margaret SquarePants, appear in several episodes of the classic era. They are warm, loving, and almost aggressively normal compared to the world their son navigates every day. They worry about him. They visit him. They are proud of him in the uncomplicated way that parents in the show were occasionally allowed to be. SpongeBob's relationship with them is affectionate and easy, which quietly explains a lot about where his relentless optimism comes from. He was raised by people who loved him simply and consistently. He has a grandmother who also appears across several episodes and who is similarly warm, the kind of grandmother who feeds people excessively and expresses love through snacks. In the episode Grandma's Kisses, SpongeBob struggles with the fact that his grandmother still treats him like a small child, kissing his cheek and knitting him sweaters, while he tries to present himself as a mature adult. The tension in that episode is funny and also completely recognizable to anyone who has ever been caught between wanting to be seen as grown up and not wanting to let go of being taken care of. Now let's talk about Gary. Gary the snail is SpongeBob's pet, and one of the show's most beloved characters. But Gary was not originally designed to be a significant part of the show at all. Steven Hillenberg included him in the show's original series Bible, the document that described the show's concept and characters to Nickelodeon, as a background detail. Hillenberg thought it would be funny if SpongeBob's pet was a snail that meowed like a cat. He also had a singing clam named Shelly as a second pet. Both of them were described in the Bible as things in SpongeBob's house, not as characters with roles to play. During the production of the first season, the writing team found that Gary was more useful and more funny than they had expected. He kept finding his way into scenes. He kept providing reactions and moments that made episodes work better. The show's marketing team also discovered that children responded to Gary strongly. They considered him, in the words of the people tracking it, an unsung hero of the show's appeal. By the time Season 2 began, a decision was made. Gary was promoted to the main character lineup. He was the first character to be added to the main cast after the show began. Plankton and Karen would be added later, but Gary came first. He went from being a background joke about a snail that meows to being a main character with his own episode arcs, his own personality, and his own confirmed interior life. The episode, Have You Seen This Snail, from Season 4, showed what happened when Gary left home after feeling neglected by SpongeBob. He wandered Bikini Bottom alone, was taken in by an elderly woman, and came genuinely close to not returning. The episode was played with real emotional weight. SpongeBob's panic and grief during Gary's absence was not played for laughs. It was played straight, and it landed. Gary, for his part, communicates entirely through the word meow. Different deliveries, different volumes, different emotional tones, all expressed through variations of the same sound. SpongeBob understands him completely. The rest of Bikini Bottom understands him to varying degrees. Patrick, in the episode Dumped, famously and heartbreakingly chose Gary over SpongeBob when Gary appeared to leave SpongeBob for Patrick, only for it to be revealed that Gary had been following Patrick because Patrick had a cookie in his pocket. Gary wanted the cookie. He was not making a statement about his loyalties. SpongeBob's job at the Krusty Krab is one of the most important facts about him, and it is worth understanding what that job actually means to him compared to what it looks like from the outside. He is a fry cook. He works at a fast food restaurant. He flips burgers and takes orders and cleans the grill. By any external measure, it is not a glamorous position. Squidward, who works the register at the same restaurant, treats the job as a personal insult to his dignity and a temporary inconvenience before his real career as an artist finally takes off. SpongeBob treats it as a calling. He arrives early. He stays late. He takes pride in every patty he makes, to a degree that goes well beyond what the job requires. The episode Pickles, from Season 1, showed what happened when SpongeBob forgot to put pickles on a single burger. One mistake, one complaint from a customer, and fell into a complete breakdown. He forgot how to do everything. He forgot how to tie his shoes. He forgot how to function. Not because he was fired or punished, but because his own standard for his work was so high that a single imperfection destabilized him entirely. That episode established something about SpongeBob that the show returned to repeatedly. His cheerfulness is not the absence of anxiety. His confidence at the grill is not the absence of fear. He is someone who has found the one thing he is genuinely excellent at, and has organized his entire sense of self around being excellent at it. When that is threatened, everything else shakes. This brings us to the other side of SpongeBob that the show was honest about, quietly and consistently throughout the classic era. Bikini Bottom has a complicated relationship with SpongeBob. He is widely known. He is often liked. People interact with him warmly in many episodes. But the episode Gone, from Season 6, revealed something that reframes the entire social dynamic of the city around him. Every year, the residents of Bikini Bottom observe a holiday called National No SpongeBob Day. On this day, every single person in the city leaves Bikini Bottom entirely to get away from SpongeBob. They carve a wooden statue of him, burn it to the ground, dance on the ashes, and then leave the city for the day. Even Patrick goes. Patrick, SpongeBob's best friend in the world, participates in National No SpongeBob Day, stating that everyone needs at least one day away from SpongeBob's laugh. SpongeBob discovers this holiday when he wakes up one morning and finds the city completely empty. He is alone in Bikini Bottom for an extended period, and the episode explores what that feels like for him. What is notable is how SpongeBob processes the information when he learns what the holiday actually is. He is not devastated, he is not angry, he is honored. He considers himself the inspiration for a community tradition, even though the tradition is built entirely around escaping him. That response tells you something important about SpongeBob's relationship with how he is perceived. He is not unaware of his effect on people. He simply chooses, consistently and deliberately, to interpret it in the most generous possible way. Whether that is emotional wisdom or a protective mechanism is something the show left open. His other major defining relationship, beyond Gary, beyond Patrick, beyond the Krusty Krab, is his relationship with driving. Or more specifically, his inability to drive. Mrs. Puff's boating school is the underwater equivalent of a driving school. Students learn to operate boatmobiles, which function exactly like cars on the ocean floor. SpongeBob has been a student at Mrs. Puff's school since it opened. He was the very first student to enroll. He has been there ever since, and he has never passed the driving portion of the test. He knows every answer to every written exam. He passes the oral portions without hesitation. He can explain driving theory with complete accuracy. But the moment he sits behind the wheel of a boatmobile and is expected to actually drive it, something happens. He panics. He freezes. He loses control. The boat goes in every direction except the right one, at speeds that are unsafe and in patterns that are genuinely dangerous to everyone nearby. The show played this as comedy consistently, and it is comedy, but it is also one of the most honest depictions in the classic era of the gap between knowing something and being able to do it under pressure. SpongeBob understands driving completely. He cannot drive. The anxiety of the actual performance overrides everything he knows the moment it matters. His relationship with Patrick Star, which we will look at more fully in a later section, was built over what the show implied was a lifetime of shared history. They grew up together. They jellyfish together. They build sandcastles and blow bubbles and get into trouble together with a level of comfort that only comes from years of simply being around each other. His friendship with Sandy Cheeks, whom he met when Sandy was performing rope tricks at Muscle Beach in the very first season, was built on a shared love of karate and a mutual respect between two people who were both, in different ways, outsiders to the world they lived in. Sandy was a squirrel in the ocean. SpongeBob was the city's most enthusiastic resident and also its most overwhelming one. They found each other and made something genuine out of it. And his relationship with Squidward, the neighbor who wanted nothing more than to be left alone, was something the show was honest about in both directions. Squidward found SpongeBob exhausting and said so constantly. SpongeBob adored Squidward and said that just as constantly. The gap between those two positions was never fully closed during the classic era, but the show made clear across many small moments that Squidward's life would have been significantly emptier without SpongeBob in it, even if Squidward himself would never have admitted it. SpongeBob SquarePants is an adult who lives alone in a pineapple, takes enormous pride in a job that the world around him treats as ordinary, loves his pet with his whole heart, has friends he would do anything for, and processes the difficulty of being himself with a cheerfulness that the show respected enough to never fully undercut. He is also, quietly, the person that the entire city of Bikini Bottom has organized itself around, for better and for worse. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the neighbor living directly next door to that pineapple, the one who spent years trying to pretend SpongeBob did not exist, is carrying a story that in many ways runs deeper and darker than anything SpongeBob himself has ever faced. And it starts with a clarinet and a dream that was never quite going to come true. Section 7. The Tragedy of Squidward Tentacles. If SpongeBob is the heart of Bikini Bottom, Squidward is its shadow. He lives next door, he works the same job, he exists inside the same world. and yet everything about his experience of that world is different. Where SpongeBob finds joy in the smallest things, Squidward finds irritation. Where SpongeBob is energized by people, Squidward is drained by them. Where SpongeBob has organized his entire life around something he genuinely loves doing, Squidward has organized his entire life around something he genuinely believes he deserves that keeps refusing to arrive. Squidward Tentacles is the show's most complicated character. Not the funniest, not the most beloved, not the one most people had on their bedroom wall, but the most complicated. Because the show built him with a level of honesty that it did not always apply to the others. An honesty about what it feels like to be talented enough to have ambitions, but not talented enough to achieve them. About what happens to a person who spends year after year waiting for a life that is not coming. He is also, despite the name and despite what the show tells you constantly, not a squid. He is an octopus. Hillenberg confirmed this directly. Squidward has 6 limbs visible throughout the show, which led most viewers to assume he was a squid. But in reality, the animators simply found 8 limbs difficult to draw consistently, so they reduced the number for practical reasons. The character was always designed and intended to be an octopus. The name Squidward was chosen because Hillenberg thought it was funnier than Octoword, which it is, but the name does not match the animal. This is a small detail, but it is the kind of detail that fits Squidward perfectly. Even the most basic fact about what he is has been misread by everyone around him his entire life. Squidward lives at 122 Conch Street, between SpongeBob's Pineapple on one side and Patrick's Rock on the other. His house is an Easter Island head, the large stone face structures that exist in real life on Easter Island in the Pacific Ocean. He chose it deliberately. It is the most artistically distinctive house on the street, the one that announces its owner's sensibilities the moment you look at it. This is not a practical choice. This is a statement. Inside, his home is filled with portraits he has painted of himself, sculptures he has made of himself, and evidence of a rich inner life that has very little outlet in the world outside. He plays the clarinet, he paints, he dances, he sculpts. He considers himself a serious artist and a serious musician, and he approaches both with a dedication and seriousness that would be admirable if the results matched the effort. They mostly do not. His clarinet playing is one of the show's most consistent running jokes. The sound it produces when Squidward plays is, in almost every episode, genuinely unpleasant. Fish cover their ears. Nearby objects crack. Patrick once said that the noise Squidward made with the clarinet sounded like someone was being hurt. The gap between the seriousness with which Squidward approaches his music and the actual sound that comes out is one of the most reliable comedy engines in the entire classic era. But here's what the show did that most cartoons would not have bothered to do. It occasionally let Squidward actually be good. At the end of the Christmas special, Christmas Who, after SpongeBob's genuine kindness moves him in a way he did not see coming, Squidward picks up his clarinet and plays a real, beautiful version of a Christmas melody. The crowd gathered outside listens in silence. The music is lovely. Squidward, for a moment, is exactly what he always believed himself to be. In the episode Bubble Stand, after spending the episode dismissing SpongeBob's bubble blowing as childish, Squidward attempts SpongeBob's technique himself. He creates a single enormous bubble in the shape of a fully realized city skyline. It is breathtaking. And then it floats away and lands on his house and destroys it. In Best Day Ever, he performs a concert where the audience gives him genuine, loud, sustained applause. The show was not saying Squidward had no talent. It was saying his talent was real, but inconsistent, emerging in bursts rather than reliably, and never quite enough to give him the career he believed he was owed. That is a much more painful thing to portray than simply making him bad at everything. Before Squidward was working the register at the Krusty Krab, the show confirmed in the episode, The Original Fry Cook, that he chose to stay at the Krusty Krab specifically because he was waiting for his music career to pay off. He told himself, and presumably told Mr. Krabs, that the job was temporary, a placeholder, something to do while the real thing got started. The real thing never got started, and the temporary job became 17 years of standing at a register, handing people food they ordered, watching his neighbor get praised for doing the same job with more enthusiasm. His relationship with a former classmate named Squilliam Fancyson adds another layer to this. Squilliam is an octopus who went to the same school as Squidward, who is wealthy, successful, genuinely talented, and who appears in several classic-era episodes specifically to humiliate Squidward in front of an audience. Squilliam succeeded at everything Squidward wanted and failed to achieve. He has a unibrow, fine clothing, and the casual confidence of someone who has never had to wait for their life to begin. Every episode featuring Squilliam is built on the same specific pain. The pain of seeing someone from your own starting point who made it to the place you always said you were going. It is not just failure. It is the particular kind of failure that involves watching someone else succeed at the thing you told yourself only you could truly appreciate. Now we come to the episode that contains the most significant piece of Squidward lore in the entire classic era. An episode we already visited briefly when discussing the history of Bikini Bottom, but which we need to return to now for what it reveals about Squidward specifically. In SB-129, Squidward travels through time to escape Spongebob and Patrick. He goes to the future, panics, gets into a time machine, overshoots his destination, and lands in the prehistoric past. He tries to play his clarinet there, but the primitive ancestors of Spongebob and Patrick chase him. He escapes them, slams the time machine lever, and ends up somewhere else entirely. He arrives in a place with no features at all. No ground, no sky, no color. No sound, nothing. Just white, endless, empty space. At first, Squidward is relieved. This is what he always said he wanted. No Spongebob, no Patrick, no Krusty Krab, no clarinet recitals that go nowhere. Just silence and space, and no one demanding anything from him. He spreads his arms out. He exhales. He says that this is where he wants to be. And then the voices start. Disembodied, echoing voices filling the emptiness with a single word, repeated over and over. Alone. 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 Squidward runs. He tries to escape the void, to find an edge or an exit. He falls through the floor. He tumbles back into the time machine. And sitting inside the machine, in the middle of the nothing he thought he wanted, he breaks completely. He cries. Not the comedic crying the show sometimes used for jokes. Real distress. He begs the machine to take him home. He says, out loud, clearly and without irony, that he misses SpongeBob. The machine brings him back to Conch Street immediately. SpongeBob and Patrick are standing outside waiting for him, holding their jellyfish nets, asking if he is finally ready to go jellyfishing. Squidward looks at them. He says no. He walks inside. The episode ends. He does not tell them what happened. He does not change. He does not come out and go jellyfishing. Nothing external shifts at all. But the audience saw what was in the void, and more importantly, they saw what broke Squidward out of it. The show buried one of its most honest, emotional moments inside a comedy episode about time travel. That is exactly the kind of writing that made the classic era so much richer than it needed to be. The depression that the void moment pointed to was not a one-time thing the show glossed over. It came up again in the episode Are You Happy Now?, in which Squidward became unable to identify a single happy memory from his life. SpongeBob, worried about him, spent the episode trying to create one. The episode went to some genuinely dark places in terms of what it showed Squidward doing alone in his house. Moments that the show framed carefully, but that older viewers read clearly for what they were. What the show consistently returned to with Squidward was the idea that the source of his unhappiness was not SpongeBob and Patrick, even though they were the most visible irritants in his daily life. The source was the gap between who he believed he was and what his life had actually become. SpongeBob and Patrick were just the people standing closest when that gap made itself felt. In the episode Artist Unknown, Squidward taught an art class at the Bikini Bottom Community Center. SpongeBob enrolled. Within minutes, without trying, without any instruction or technique, SpongeBob produced a sculpture of such effortless beauty that it stopped everyone in the room. He had not been working at it. He had not been striving. He simply made something extraordinary the way some people do, without any apparent understanding of how they did it. Squidward, who had spent years developing his technique and studying his craft, could produce nothing comparable. The episode made that comparison with complete clarity and did not soften it. Squidward's skill was practiced and deliberate and real. SpongeBob's was natural and unconscious and better. That is a hard thing to put in a children's cartoon. The show put it in anyway. One of Squidward's most unexpectedly honest moments in the classic era came in the episode Squidville, where he finally got everything he claimed to want. After SpongeBob accidentally destroyed his house with a reef blower, Squidward moved to a gated community called Tentacle Acres, a suburb populated entirely by octopuses who all looked exactly like him, all shared his interests, all played the clarinet, all appreciated interpretive dance and high culture. A community of Squidwards. He was miserable within days. The other residents played their clarinets without enthusiasm. The routine was perfect and completely dead. Nobody challenged him. Nobody surprised him. Nobody drove him out of his mind with noise or unexpected visits or jellyfish nets pressed against his front window at 6 in the morning. The absence of SpongeBob and Patrick, which he had wished for so consistently and so loudly, turned out to feel exactly like the void in SB-129. Silent, empty, alone. He went back. He said he was bored, but the show had shown its hand. Squidward's life, irritating as it was animated by the very things he spent the most energy resisting. The clarinet was always the most honest symbol of who Squidward was. He held it when he was unhappy. He played it when he needed to feel like himself. He practiced it with a dedication that never quite translated into the results he believed he deserved. And across the classic era, in rare moments when the show let him actually be good, the instrument briefly became what he always insisted it could be. Squidward Tentacles is the story of a person who is not wrong about who he is. He is intelligent. He has genuine taste. He feels things deeply, but who is slightly wrong about his own talent in a way that cannot be corrected by effort alone. And he knows it, somewhere underneath the confidence, which is why the confidence is so loud. He is one of the most human characters ever written for a children's cartoon. And he lives next door to someone whose relationship with the world is so different from his own that spending time near him is both the most irritating and the most quietly sustaining thing in Squidward's life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But just on the other side of Squidward's house, under a rock, lives someone whose relationship with the world could not be more different from either of them. Someone who has no ambitions, no anxieties, no career plans, and no complicated feelings about any of it. And there is more going on under that rock than anyone ever gave him credit for. Section 8. Patrick Star, The Rock, and the Philosophy of Nothing. There is a temptation, when talking about Patrick Star, to spend the whole time listing things he said that made no sense. And there is a lot of material there. The mayonnaise instrument, the Wumbo speech, Finland, the inner machinations. Patrick produced more genuinely baffling statements per episode than any other character in the classic era, and the show was completely aware of how funny that was. But if that is all you take from Patrick, you have missed something. Because underneath the comedy of a starfish who does not know what an elevator is, or how to use a door, the show built a character whose relationship with the world was quietly and consistently more interesting than it first appeared. Patrick was not just the dumb one. Patrick was someone who had, entirely by accident, or perhaps by some kind of deeper instinct, found a way to live that the other characters around him spent their entire lives failing to achieve. He was content. Genuinely, completely, almost inexplicably content. And in a show full of characters defined by what they wanted and could not have. Plankton wanting the formula, Squidward wanting recognition, Krabs wanting more money, Mrs. Puff wanting SpongeBob to pass his driving test, Patrick wanted almost nothing. And he had almost nothing. And he was fine. Patrick Star lives at 120 Conch Street under a rock. Not inside a building shaped like a rock. Under an actual rock. He lifts it, goes underneath, and that is his home. In the earliest episodes of the classic era, when the show occasionally showed the interior of Patrick's rock, There was almost nothing there. No furniture, no decorations, no real structure. Just the underside of a rock with Patrick sitting in it. This changed across later episodes, with the interior becoming more defined and more detailed depending on what the story needed. But the foundational image of Patrick's home in the classic era is a rock with nothing underneath it. He chose this. He is happy in it. The rock is on the same street as SpongeBob's elaborately decorated pineapple, and Squidward's artistically selected Easter Island head. And Patrick's contribution to the neighborhood aesthetic is a flat gray rock that could be mistaken for part of the ground. He has no job in the classic era, no career ambitions, no morning routine built around professional obligations. His days are organized entirely around what sounds good at the moment, usually whatever SpongeBob is doing, or sleeping, or eating, or some combination of all three. His family, when the show introduced them across various episodes, consisted of his parents Herb and Margie Starr. They were warm and present in the episodes where they appeared. The show also introduced his sister Sam in a later episode, a larger and significantly more intense starfish who expressed affection through aggressive physical contact. What the family episodes established about Patrick was something the show had been suggesting all along. The simplicity was not damage. It was not the result of something going wrong. Patrick came from a family of similarly simple, similarly warm people, and he had continued being that person into adulthood without any apparent conflict about it. He was not a simpler version of something that was supposed to be more complicated. He was exactly what he was supposed to be. His grades in school, referenced in the show across a couple of episodes, were consistently poor going back to his earliest years. This was not framed as a tragedy. The show treated Patrick's academic history the way it treated everything about Patrick, as a fact about who he was, rather than a problem that needed solving. The moments that made Patrick genuinely interesting in the classic era were not the jokes. They were the moments when the show revealed that Patrick was more aware of things than he let on, or when his accidental wisdom turned out to be more useful than the deliberate thinking happening around him. In the episode Rockabye Bivalve, SpongeBob and Patrick adopted a baby scallop together and attempted to raise it as a family. Patrick took on the role of the parent who went to work, while SpongeBob stayed home. Every morning, Patrick left the house saying he was going to work, and every evening, he came home exhausted. SpongeBob eventually confronted him about what he had actually been doing all day. It turned out, Patrick had been sitting on a rock watching television in someone else's house. He had been doing nothing and calling it work with complete commitment. The episode is played as a joke about Patrick's laziness, but it also quietly demonstrated that Patrick understood the structure of the situation well enough to perform his role in it convincingly for an extended period. He knew what was expected, he just chose not to do it. That is a different thing from not knowing. In the episode Rule of Dumb, a royal document surfaced revealing that Patrick was next in line to be king of Bikini Bottom. He was given a crown and a throne, and told he could have anything he wanted. Within a very short period, Patrick became exactly the kind of ruler you would expect from someone given unlimited power without any preparation for it. He demanded things from people. He took what he wanted. He made decisions based entirely on what he felt like in the moment. The episode ended with Patrick looking into a mirror and seeing a monster looking back at him. He took the crown off himself. He gave everything back. He walked away from the power voluntarily, because what he saw in his own reflection was not who he wanted to be. That is not a dumb character moment. That is a character who, when confronted with genuine evidence of his own behavior, made an immediate and correct moral decision. Patrick has no complicated relationship with right and wrong. When the show made the two options clear enough for him to see them both at the same time, he always chose correctly. The episode, I'm with Stupid, from Season 3, is the one that complicates the easy reading of Patrick the most directly. Patrick's parents were coming to visit, and Patrick was embarrassed about his reputation for being simple. He asked SpongeBob to pretend to be even less intelligent than Patrick during the visit, so that by comparison, Patrick would seem competent. SpongeBob agreed, as SpongeBob always agreed to things when Patrick asked, and spent the visit behaving in the most over-the-top, confused way possible. The plan worked. Patrick's parents were impressed, but the episode then went somewhere slightly uncomfortable. Patrick began to actually believe the performance. He started talking to SpongeBob as if SpongeBob genuinely was less intelligent than him, in front of other people, with real confidence. He was not performing anymore. He had absorbed the fiction and was living inside it. SpongeBob eventually had to point out what was happening. Patrick came back to reality. The episode resolved, but what it showed in the middle, briefly and clearly, was that Patrick was fully capable of updating his understanding of himself when the environment gave him permission to. He knew, on some level, how he was seen, and when a situation arose where he was allowed to see himself differently, he did. Immediately and completely. His friendship with SpongeBob is the central relationship of the show in many ways, and in the classic era, it was built on a foundation of shared history that the show implied stretched back to childhood. They did not just meet as adults and happen to get along. They grew up together. The comfort between them, the ease of their interactions, the way they moved through their days without needing to explain themselves to each other, all of it pointed to two people who had simply always been present in each other's lives. SpongeBob would do anything for Patrick. This was tested repeatedly across the classic era, and it held every time. Patrick would do anything for SpongeBob, within the limits of what Patrick could understand was needed, which was sometimes a significant limit, but was always genuine. In the episode The Secret Box, SpongeBob became obsessed with knowing what was inside a box Patrick kept, and refused to let anyone see. The contents of the box, when finally revealed, were a piece of string. That was it. An ordinary piece of string. Patrick's most prized secret possession was something with no apparent value to anyone. The show played this as the joke it was, but it was also consistent with something true about Patrick. The things he valued most were not the things anyone else would have thought to value. His priorities were genuinely his own. What the classic era of the show did with Patrick, across all of these episodes, was build a character who looked from the outside like the simplest person in Bikini Bottom and was, from the inside, expressing something the other characters around him could not quite access. Squidward wanted recognition and could not get it. Krabs wanted security and could never have enough of it. Plankton wanted the formula and could never reach it. SpongeBob wanted to be excellent and carried the anxiety of that standard with him every day. All of them were defined by distance, the space between what they wanted and what they had. Patrick had almost no distance. He wanted very little. He had more or less what he wanted. He lived under a rock and was happy in it, and the happiness was real, and the show never once suggested it was foolish or that Patrick was missing something important by living that way. There is an episode called Patrick Smart Pants, in which Patrick temporarily became highly intelligent after an accident. He could suddenly understand science, art, philosophy, and advanced ideas of all kinds. He and SpongeBob could no longer connect the way they used to, because Patrick had moved to a place in his thinking that SpongeBob could not follow. Patrick was surrounded by people who found his new intelligence impressive, but he was completely alone in the way that mattered. He chose to go back. He found a way to return to who he was before, and when he did, when the intelligence was gone and he was back under his rock with SpongeBob and his jellyfish net and his ordinary, uncomplicated days, he was relieved. That is the show's clearest statement about what Patrick represented in the world of Bikini Bottom. Given the choice between intelligence with isolation and simplicity with genuine connection, Patrick chose connection every time. He was the least ambitious person in a city full of ambition, and he may have been the happiest person in it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But just beyond the outskirts of the neighborhood these three characters shared, in a glass dome filled with Texas air, lived someone whose story began thousands of miles away on the surface of the earth. Someone who came to the bottom of the ocean by choice, built her own home with her own hands, and brought an entirely different way of seeing the world down with her. Sandy Cheeks had no business being underwater, and the fact that she was anyway tells you everything about who she was. Section 9. Sandy Cheeks and the Tree Dome, an outsider's Bikini Bottom. Every character in the main cast of classic SpongeBob belongs to the ocean in one way or another. SpongeBob is a sea sponge. Patrick is a starfish. Squidward is an octopus. Mr. Krabs is a crab. Plankton is a microscopic ocean creature. They were all born in the water, raised in the water, and have never had to think about whether the water was a place they could survive in. It is simply where they are from. Sandy Cheeks is from Houston, Texas. She is a squirrel. She breathes air. She came down to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean from the surface of the earth by choice, built herself a home there, and has been living in it ever since. Everything about her presence in Bikini Bottom is the result of a deliberate decision she made to be somewhere that should be completely inhospitable to her, and then figured out how to make work through science and personal determination. She is also, by a significant distance, the smartest character in the show, and the classic era consistently underused her because of it. Sandy was born on November 17th in Houston, Texas. Her full name is Sandra Jennifer Olivia Cheeks. She has a twin brother named Randy Cheeks, and her parents are referred to in the show as Ma and Pa Cheeks. She grew up in Texas, and the state shaped her in every visible way. She speaks with a heavy Southern accent, uses Texas slang naturally and constantly, loves rodeos, country music, and extreme sports, and carries herself with the particular confidence of someone who was raised to believe that hard work and toughness were the baseline requirement for getting through a day. Her reason for being underwater is connected to her work as a scientist. She was employed by a group of primates, revealed in the episode Chimps Ahoy, to conduct scientific research beneath the ocean surface. She was sent down, built her home, and began her work. The primates who employed her occasionally visited to check on her progress and evaluate whether her research justified the expense of keeping her there. In that episode, Sandy had to demonstrate results quickly to prevent being pulled out of Bikini Bottom and sent back to Texas. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward accidentally helped her produce something impressive enough to satisfy the evaluators, and she was allowed to stay. This detail, that Sandy's presence in Bikini Bottom was contingent on continuing to produce scientific results, adds something to her character that the show mostly left in the background. She was not just living there because she liked it. She was there to work. The Tree Dome was not just a home, it was a research station. The Tree Dome itself is one of the most interesting structures in all of Bikini Bottom. It sits at 1 Bikini Bottom Road, and it is a large glass dome filled with fresh air instead of water. Inside the dome, Sandy has created a self-sustaining environment that includes a living oak tree, a bird bath, a wheel for exercise, flowers, and enough square footage to practice karate, conduct scientific experiments, and live comfortably. She built the dome herself. She built her own air suit and helmet herself. She engineered every part of her own survival underwater, using her own knowledge and her own hands. When other characters visit the Tree Dome, they have to wear helmets filled with water over their heads in order to breathe inside the air-filled dome. This is the reverse of what Sandy has to do when she leaves. She puts on her full air suit and helmet before going out into Bikini Bottom's water environment. Both Sandy and her visitors are always one step away from an environment that would kill them, and both sides have worked out the exact equipment needed to manage that gap. In the winter, when Sandy hibernates, the Tree Dome goes through a dramatic transformation. The episode, Sandy's Rocket, shows the dome in its normal warm weather state. But the episodes dealing with Sandy's hibernation season show the inside of the dome freezing completely, covered in snow and ice, the tree bare, the whole environment shut down and cold. Sandy sleeps through this period in a deep hibernation that the show treated as a genuine biological reality of being a squirrel, not just a quirk. SpongeBob and Patrick, in one hibernation episode, accidentally woke Sandy up early and had to deal with a disoriented, barely conscious Sandy who was not fully herself. The episode played this as comedy, but the underlying detail was accurate to how hibernation actually works. Waking an animal mid-hibernation is genuinely disorienting and unpleasant for the animal. Sandy's scientific skills were demonstrated across many classic-era episodes, though the show rarely made them the center of the story. She appeared in the background of episodes building things, experimenting with things, and solving problems that other characters had created. In Chimps Ahoy, she built a machine that could read minds, a device that opened things without using hands, and a submarine in a single day, purely to satisfy her employer's evaluation. She did all three before noon. She is shown in multiple episodes to be an expert in karate, one of the strongest characters in the show physically, and capable of feats of endurance and athletic performance that far exceed what any other character manages. In pre-hibernation week, she dragged Spongebob through an entire week of extreme sports activities at full intensity. Activities that included sandboarding down Sand Mountain at dangerous speeds, riding a seahorse through an industrial area, and cycling through environments that were genuinely hazardous to Spongebob's health. Spongebob kept up as long as he could, and then went into hiding because the pace was genuinely unsustainable for him. Sandy did not notice he was gone immediately because the pace felt normal to her. The episode that tells you the most about Sandy's interior life is Texas, from Season 1. Sandy has been in Bikini Bottom for some time at this point. She has her tree dome, her work, her friendships, her routines. And then one afternoon, she becomes overwhelmed with homesickness. She misses Texas. She misses the open sky and the dry air and the wide flat land and the sound of country music coming from somewhere nearby. She misses things that Bikini Bottom structurally cannot give her because they do not exist at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The episode shows Sandy genuinely emotional in a way the show did not usually allow its characters to be. Singing about everything she left behind when she came underwater, she decides to go back. She tells Spongebob she is leaving Bikini Bottom and returning to Texas. Spongebob's response to this news is one of his most revealing moments in the classic era. He is completely unwilling to accept it. He and Patrick spend the episode trying to convince Sandy to stay, including making jokes about Texas that were intended to make her so angry she would forget about leaving, knowing that her pride in her home state was strong enough that insulting it would provoke a strong reaction. The plan worked in the sense that Sandy chased them down and stayed in Bikini Bottom long enough to decide she wanted to remain. But what the episode established underneath its comedy was important. Sandy's connection to where she came from was real and ongoing. She had not replaced Texas with Bikini Bottom. She carried both places inside her, and sometimes the distance between them was heavy. Her friendship with Spongebob was one of the most genuinely equal relationships in the classic era. They bonded originally over karate, meeting at Muscle Beach in Tea at the Tree Dome, when Sandy was performing rope tricks and Spongebob was immediately impressed. From that first meeting, their relationship was built on mutual respect and a shared enjoyment of being physical and active together. The karate episodes gave their friendship a specific texture that none of Spongebob's other relationships had. With Patrick, Spongebob was the more capable and responsible one. With Squidward, Spongebob was the one being tolerated. With Sandy, they were peers. She was better than him at karate by a significant margin and was honest about that, but she enjoyed their sessions genuinely and treated him as a real partner in them. Spongebob, for his part, was fully committed to getting better, even though getting better never seemed to close the gap between them very much. In Karate Choppers, Mr. Krabs banned Spongebob from doing karate after it began affecting his work. Spongebob agreed to stop, but found the impulse nearly impossible to control. The episode treated his love of karate as something close to an addiction, not in a dark way, but in the way that real enthusiasms take hold of people and refuse to let go. His friendship with Sandy was the source of that enthusiasm, and the episode showed how deeply the two of them had shaped each other's daily life through it. Sandy's status as an outsider in Bikini Bottom was never played as a problem to be solved. The show did not treat her presence underwater as something that needed to be explained away or justified beyond the basic setup. She was there. She had made it work. The airsuit was her normal. The tree dome was her home. But the outsider perspective gave her something the other characters did not quite have. She saw Bikini Bottom from a distance that was always slightly present, even when she was fully inside it. She had a comparison point. She knew what a different world looked like because she had come from one, and that knowledge shaped how she engaged with everything around her. She was not nostalgic for the surface in every episode. Most of the time, she was fully present in Bikini Bottom, fully invested in her work and her friendships, fully committed to the life she had built there. But Texas was always in her voice, and her posture, and the way she faced problems, with the directness and the physical confidence of someone who was raised in wide open spaces and carried that openness with her into a glass dome at the bottom of the sea. She was the show's reminder that Bikini Bottom was extraordinary. Not to the people who grew up there, for whom it was simply home, but to someone who arrived from the outside and chose it anyway, again and again, even when the homesickness came and the sky she remembered was very far away. Sandy Cheeks deserved more episodes than she got in the classic era. She was the most capable character in the main cast, the most scientifically literate, the most physically accomplished, and one of the most emotionally honest when the show gave her room to be. The classic era gave her that room occasionally, and in those moments, she was one of the best things about the show. But her story, and the stories of every character we have covered so far, all ran through a building on Conch Street, a restaurant owned by a crab who built it out of desperation and ran it with a combination of genuine love for his product and a complete willingness to exploit everyone around him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And at the center of that restaurant, behind the wheel of a boatmobile she never asked to be responsible for, was a woman whose entire career had been reshaped by one student. A woman who had lost her husband, built a school from nothing, and spent every working day being arrested, inflated, and sent back to start over again. Her story is one of the most quietly devastating in the entire show, and it begins with a compromise that almost never happened. Section 10. Mrs. Puff and the Curse of Boating School. There is a running joke in classic Spongebob that everyone in Bikini Bottom is aware of. SpongeBob SquarePants cannot pass his boating test. He has taken it more times than anyone can count. He has failed it more times than anyone can count. He destroys the boat during the driving portion every single time, without exception, and the wreckage is always spectacular and always involves significant property damage to the surrounding area of Bikini Bottom. The joke lands because SpongeBob is otherwise extremely competent. He is an exceptional fry cook. He is physically capable and energetic. He is passionate and hardworking, and genuinely tries his absolute best every single time he sits behind the wheel. The failure is not from a lack of effort. Something happens between SpongeBob knowing how to drive and SpongeBob actually driving. And whatever that something is, has never been fixed across the entire classic era. But the joke has a second half that the show returned to again and again. Every time SpongeBob fails his boating test, every time the boat explodes, and the debris settles and the smoke clears, the camera finds Mrs. Puff. And Mrs. Puff inflates into a large round pufferfish shape, which is what pufferfish do when they are under extreme stress. And then she is either taken to the hospital or taken to jail, or both. She is the other side of the joke, and the longer you look at her side of it, the less funny it becomes. Mrs. Puff's full name is Poppy Puff. She runs Mrs. Puff's boating school, which sits on the outskirts of Bikini Bottom and has been almost entirely destroyed and rebuilt multiple times over the course of the classic era. The school is her creation and her livelihood. She built it herself and has run it herself for as long as she has been in Bikini Bottom. She is a pufferfish, which in the world of the show means that physical stress or fear causes her body to automatically inflate into a large sphere. This happens involuntarily. She does not choose to inflate. The inflation is her body's automatic response to danger, the same way a real pufferfish puffs up when threatened. In Mrs. Puff's case, the trigger for this response is almost always SpongeBob behind the wheel of a boating vehicle. Her life before Bikini Bottom is addressed in one episode from the classic era, and what that episode revealed was not played for extended drama, but contained enough information to reframe everything about how she carries herself. Mrs. Puff had a husband, Mr. Puff. He was a pufferfish like her, and he is no longer alive. He was caught by a fisherman and turned into a novelty lamp. The episode showed an image of the lamp with Mr. Puff's face on it. She moved to Bikini Bottom after this. She built her school. She started her life over. The show never returned to this detail in a serious way. It did not need to. The information was there, sitting quietly under every episode involving Mrs. Puff, adding weight to a character who is usually framed as a victim of circumstance and comedy. She had survived something genuinely terrible before SpongeBob ever walked through her classroom door, and she had kept going anyway. Her school is a real institution in Bikini Bottom. She has other students beyond Spongebob. They appear in the background of classroom scenes, they come and go, they pass their tests and leave, and presumably drive boats competently somewhere in the city. The school functions. Other people learn to drive there and succeed. Spongebob has been her student for years. The exact number shifts depending on the episode, but the classic era consistently portrayed their relationship as one with deep history. Not a new teacher-student dynamic, but something that had been going on long enough for Mrs. Puff to know, with complete certainty, exactly what was going to happen every single time SpongeBob took the wheel. She knows the test is going to go badly. She knows the boat is going to be destroyed. She knows she is going to end up inflated and in pain and probably arrested. She knows all of this before it happens, and it happens anyway. And then she shows up the next day and teaches the class again. The episode that examined Mrs. Puff's situation most directly was Doing Time from Season 3. In this episode, Mrs. Puff was sent to prison following one of SpongeBob's driving disasters. She settled into prison life and discovered, to her genuine surprise and then to her deep relief, that she preferred it to teaching SpongeBob. The food was acceptable. She had a routine. SpongeBob was not there. For the first time in a very long time, she was safe. SpongeBob, devastated by guilt over what his driving had cost her, decided to break her out of prison. He staged increasingly elaborate rescue attempts because he believed Mrs. Puff would be happier outside, not understanding that Mrs. Puff was, for once, actually content where she was. Every rescue attempt failed and resulted in Mrs. Puff being recaptured and sent back to prison, which was fine with her. The episode ended with Mrs. Puff back in prison, having a peaceful dream, and SpongeBob bursting in through the wall to rescue her one more time. The episode was funny. It was also, underneath the comedy, a portrait of a woman who had found the one environment where her life was manageable. And that environment was a prison cell away from her student. She has been arrested multiple times across the classic era. The specific charges vary, but the cause is always the same. When SpongeBob destroys a boat or causes damage to property or injuries to bystanders during his driving test, the legal responsibility lands on Mrs. Puff as the instructor. She is the adult in charge. The destruction that SpongeBob causes becomes, in the eyes of Bikini Bottom's legal system, her problem. She has a criminal record as a result. The show acknowledged this across several episodes without dwelling on it. It was treated as background information, a fact about Mrs. Puff's life, in the same way that Patrick living under a rock is a fact about his. But the accumulation of it, spread across the classic era, painted a picture of someone whose professional reputation and legal standing were being steadily damaged by a situation she had no way to exit. She cannot simply refuse to teach SpongeBob. She cannot bar him from the school permanently without cause. And failing the test repeatedly is not cause. It means he needs more instruction, not less. She cannot change the outcome by changing her teaching, because she has tried every approach available to her, and SpongeBob's problem is not one that teaching can fix. She is trapped inside a system that keeps producing the same result, and the system keeps directing the consequences toward her. There is an episode called Boat Smarts in which Mrs. Puff presented an educational film comparing a good boating student and a poor boating student. SpongeBob played the poor student in the film. The film showed, step by step, every mistake SpongeBob made and how each one violated basic safe driving practice. The film was completely accurate. Every criticism of SpongeBob's driving in the film was fair and supported by what the show had shown across dozens of episodes. He did not check his mirrors. He did not signal. He accelerated without awareness of his surroundings. He let his emotions take over the wheel. The film was Mrs. Puff's clearest attempt to show SpongeBob, using himself as the example, exactly what he was doing wrong. At the end of the episode, SpongeBob received an award for being in the film. The boat he was driving crashed into Mrs. Puff anyway. The episode Krusty Love, which appeared earlier in this essay in the context of Mr. Krabs, is also one of Mrs. Puff's most important episodes. It is the episode in which Krabs fell in love with her after they met on a beach, and the two began a relationship that carried forward in the background of the classic era. What Krusty Love established about Mrs. Puff, separate from what it established about Krabs, was that she was capable of warmth and openness toward people outside of her classroom. With Krabs, she was relaxed. She laughed. She engaged. She was genuinely happy in a way that the boating school episodes almost never showed her. The relationship with Krabs was played primarily for comedy. His inability to stop being cheap, his outsourcing of gift buying to Spongebob, but Mrs. Puff's side of it was straightforward. She liked him. She enjoyed his company. She was a person with an interior life that extended well beyond the school that had become a kind of prison for her. The contrast between Mrs. Puff at dinner with Krabs and Mrs. Puff, watching SpongeBob take the wheel, was the clearest illustration of what the boating school had cost her. She was not a person defined by anxiety and frustration. She was a person who had been put into a situation that produced anxiety and frustration so reliably and so repeatedly that it had become her dominant public state. Her character arc across the classic era, such as it was, did not resolve. There was no episode in which SpongeBob passed his test and freed her. There was no moment where the cycle broke. She stayed in the school, SpongeBob stayed in her class, and the disasters kept coming. What changed, slowly and across many episodes, was the audience's understanding of what that meant. The joke about Mrs. Puff inflating after a crash started as a simple physical gag. Pufferfish puff up. That is funny. Over time, with the accumulated weight of her history, the same image carried more information. She had lost her husband. She had rebuilt her life. She had built a school and a career and a reputation. And one student had spent years systematically, accidentally, and with genuine love for her as a teacher, taking all of it apart. She kept showing up anyway. That is not a funny detail. That is the detail that makes Mrs. Puff one of the most human characters in the classic era of the show. Not because of what happened to her, but because of what she did after it kept happening. The characters of Bikini Bottom, as this essay has worked through them one by one, share something beneath their differences. SpongeBob carries anxiety under his joy. Squidward carries grief under his pride. Krabs carries fear under his greed. Patrick carries wisdom under his simplicity. Sandy carries homesickness under her confidence. Mrs. Puff carries endurance under her exhaustion. All of them are more than the surface the show presented first. But Bikini Bottom's world is not made entirely of residents who live in it full time. Some of its most important figures exist at the edges, arriving unannounced, operating outside the normal rules of the city, belonging to a history that stretches back further than anyone living in a pineapple or a tree dome or under a rock. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One of them has been sailing the seas since long before Bikini Bottom existed. He has a ship the size of a city block, a crew of the dead, and an unresolved legal claim over SpongeBob's soul. He is not done collecting. Section 11. The Flying Dutchman, Mermaid Man, and the Supernatural Edge of Bikini Bottom. Bikini Bottom has a police force, a court system, a hospital, a mall, and a weekly newspaper. It functions like a city. It has rules and institutions, and a general sense that the world operates in an orderly and predictable way. And then the Flying Dutchman shows up, and none of that matters anymore. The supernatural layer of the classic SpongeBob era is easy to overlook because it sits so casually alongside everything else. The Flying Dutchman arrives, chaos happens, and then the next episode is about a spatula, or a jellyfish, or a sandwich. The show never treated its ghost pirate as a major disruption to the tone. He was just another part of Bikini Bottom's world, terrifying to the people who lived there, treated by the show with the same relaxed comedic energy as everything else. But the Flying Dutchman, and the world he represented, contained some of the most specific and carefully constructed lore in the entire classic era. The Flying Dutchman is a ghost. He has been a ghost for a very long time. The show established that he has been haunting the seas for centuries, sailing on his ship, collecting souls, and terrorizing whoever crossed his path. He is large, green, and glowing, with a long beard, a pirate hat, and a body that fades into a wispy tail instead of legs. His ship, also called the Flying Dutchman, moves through the ocean and through the air and through solid objects without apparent difficulty. His origin, referenced briefly across the classic era, connects to a real-world legend. The Flying Dutchman is a famous ghost ship story that sailors told for centuries, a vessel doomed to sail the seas forever, never able to make port. The Spongebob version gave this legend a specific and slightly absurd detail. The reason the Dutchman cannot rest in peace is that his body, after he died, was used as a mannequin in a clothing store window. He was never properly buried. The disrespect of having his corpse displayed in a shop window is what kept him bound to the world as a ghost, unable to move on. This detail was not played for extended sadness. It was treated as background information, delivered quickly and then set aside. But it did something important. It gave the Dutchman a grievance that was genuinely understandable. He was not evil for the pleasure of it. He was stuck. And he was angry about being stuck. And the anger had had centuries to develop into something vast and deeply unpleasant. His first major appearance in the classic era was the episode Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost, though his most significant early appearance was Scaredy Pants in the Season 1 Halloween special. His most lore-heavy appearance came in the Season 2 episode Shanghaied, which is the episode the classic era devoted most directly to exploring who he was and how his world worked. In Shanghaied, the Flying Dutchman's ship crashed into Spongebob and Patrick's neighborhood, destroying the front of their houses. The Dutchman emerged, furious, and announced he was taking them aboard his ship as crew members to serve him forever. Spongebob and Patrick were given 3 wishes as a parting gift before their eternal service began. Wishes provided by the Dutchman's magical nature as a supernatural being. The wishes were used badly, as wishes in SpongeBob episodes always were. The episode then moved through the Dutchman's ship, showing its various rooms and functions. A room of darkness, a dining area where the ghost crew ate, the main deck where the Dutchman commanded his operations. The ship was populated by ghost crew members who had presumably been collected over the Dutchman's centuries of sailing. None of them were named or given individual stories in the classic era, but their presence confirmed that soul collection was an ongoing and organized operation, not a casual hobby. The episode ended with Squidward also being taken aboard, and then the Dutchman eating SpongeBob and Patrick. The show presented multiple endings in this episode, allowing viewers to choose between them, which was a structural experiment the classic era attempted only this once. What the Flying Dutchman added to Bikini Bottom's world was a reminder that the city existed inside a much larger history. The Dutchman had been sailing before Bikini Bottom was built. He would be sailing after it was gone. His presence put the city in perspective. All of its institutions and routines and dramas were happening inside a world that had existed long before them and operated on rules that the city's residents had no control over. He also added a consistent theological implication to the show that most children watching probably absorbed without registering. The Flying Dutchman collected souls. This meant souls existed in the world of the show, which meant there was something beyond death, which meant every character in the show had a soul that was, in principle, collectible. The show never pushed this into uncomfortable territory, but it was there, sitting in the background of every Dutchman appearance. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy occupied a different corner of Bikini Bottom's supernatural and heroic history. They were elderly, retired superheroes living in Shady Shoals retirement home, and they were the subjects of SpongeBob's most devoted and longest-running fandom within the show. Mermaid Man was based loosely on the Aquaman character from DC Comics, an underwater superhero with a starfish on his nose, a belt with powerful magical properties, and a history of saving the ocean from villains. Barnacle Boy was his sidekick, younger by comparison, though still very old, and the source of most of the practical thinking in their partnership during their retirement years. Their history in the show was presented through the lens of SpongeBob's obsession with them. SpongeBob had grown up watching their television show. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy had a long-running series that was apparently a major part of Bikini Bottom's cultural history. SpongeBob and Patrick had seen every episode, owned merchandise, and treated the 2 retired heroes with the kind of reverence usually reserved for much more impressive figures. The comedy of their appearances came from the contrast between who they had been and who they were now. In their prime, they had fought real villains, protected the ocean, and performed acts of genuine heroism. In the present, they were old, confused, easily startled, and living in a retirement home where they watched television and ate dinner at 4 in the afternoon. Mermaid Man's belt was a central piece of lore across their episodes. The belt had the ability to shrink objects, and in the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4, SpongeBob accidentally activated the belt and shrank several residents of Bikini Bottom down to extremely small sizes. The belt could not reverse what it had done once activated incorrectly. SpongeBob spent the episode trying to fix what he had caused, enlisting Mermaid Man's help to understand how the belt worked well enough to undo the damage. The belt's power was presented as real and significant. Not a toy or a prop, but an actual functioning piece of equipment from their superhero years. This established that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's heroic history was not fictional within the show. They had genuinely been superheroes. The things they had done and the equipment they had used had real effects on the real world of Bikini Bottom. Their villain, Man Ray, appeared in the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3. Man Ray had been trapped in frozen tartar sauce for years, imprisoned by Mermaid Man before his retirement. SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally freed him. The episode then followed an attempt to rehabilitate Man Ray using a tickle belt, a device that would cause Man Ray pain whenever he did something wrong and release him when he acted correctly. Man Ray genuinely tried to reform during the episode. He attempted to behave well. He practiced basic social courtesies. He made an effort. The obstacle was Patrick, who kept refusing to accept that Man Ray's attempts at good behavior were genuine, which kept triggering the belt, which kept causing Man Ray pain even when he was doing nothing wrong. By the end of the episode, Man Ray had given up on rehabilitation entirely. The show presented this as a comedy conclusion, but the episode made a point that was slightly more interesting underneath the joke. That someone trying to change can be pushed back toward who they were by the people around them, refusing to believe the change is real. The supernatural elements of the classic era, the Dutchman's ghost ship, Mermaid Man's belt, Man Ray's history, the world of heroes and villains that existed before the show began, all pointed toward the same thing, the geography and the character. Backstories pointed toward. Bikini Bottom was old. It had history that predated SpongeBob's pineapple and Patrick's rock and the Krusty Krab. The world the show built was not just the street where these characters lived. It was a world with layers going back further than any of them could see. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The person who understood that most clearly was not a character in the show at all. He was the man who built the show from the ground up, starting with a love of tide pools and a hand-drawn comic, and a belief that children deserved something better than what they were usually given. His name was Stephen Hillenberg, and without him, none of this existed. Section 12. Stephen Hillenberg and the tide pool that started everything. Before there was a Krusty Krab, before there was a pineapple on Conch Street, before there was a fry cook who cried at the thought of losing his job, there was a man standing at the edge of the ocean, looking into a tide pool. Stephen Hillenberg grew up in Lawton, Oklahoma, and later in Anaheim, California. He was not a television person first. He was not someone who grew up drawing cartoons and dreaming about making a show. He was someone who loved the ocean. He loved the specific, small, overlooked world that existed in tide pools. The shallow, rocky areas along coastlines where the ocean retreats at low tide and leaves behind a miniature ecosystem full of small animals living their small lives in a few inches of water. He studied marine biology at Humboldt State University in California, graduating in 1984. After graduating, he went to work as a marine science educator at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California. His job was to teach children about ocean life, to take kids who had never thought much about what lived in the water and show them that the underwater world was worth paying attention to. He was good at his job, and the way he was good at it tells you a great deal about how SpongeBob SquarePants eventually turned out. Hillenberg believed that the best way to get children interested in ocean life was not to lecture them. It was to tell them stories. He created an educational comic book called The Intertidal Zone, while working at the Ocean Institute. The comic featured anthropomorphized ocean creatures, animals with human characteristics, living lives in the ocean that children could follow and care about. The comic was used as a teaching tool. It was not a professional publication. It was something Hillenberg made for the kids he was teaching, because he believed a story would reach them in a way that a fact sheet would not. Several of the characters in the inner title zone were early versions of what would eventually become Spongebob characters. A sponge character named Bob appeared in the comic. The comic's general approach: ocean creatures with distinct personalities, living in a world that felt both genuinely aquatic and recognizably human, was the same approach that would define SpongeBob SquarePants a decade later. After working at the Ocean Institute, Hillenberg decided he wanted to pursue animation professionally. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts and earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in experimental animation in 1992. He was not a young student just out of high school. He was a working professional who had built a career in marine education and then deliberately chose to start over in a new field because he believed he had something worth making. He joined the Nickelodeon show Rocko's Modern Life in 1993 as a director and writer. He worked on Rocko for its entire run, developing his skills in character writing, comedic timing, and the specific kind of layered humor that works for both children and adults simultaneously. His time on Rocko was where he learned how to make a cartoon. Not the marine biology and not the art degree, but the actual daily work of producing episodes, solving story problems, and building a world that an audience would want to return to. When Rocko ended in 1996, Hillenberg began developing what would become SpongeBob SquarePants. He brought a folder to his pitch meeting at Nickelodeon that contained drawings of the characters, a painted background of Bikini Bottom's underwater setting, and a working model of the show's world. He also brought a fish tank. He set the fish tank on the table during the pitch and used it to help the executives understand the visual environment he was trying to create. The character was originally going to be named SpongeBoy. Hillenberg preferred this name. When Nickelodeon's legal team discovered that SpongeBoy was already a trademarked name for a mop, Hillenberg moved to SpongeBob. He kept the sponge because the sponge mattered to him. A real sea sponge is a filter animal, an organism that processes its environment constantly, taking things in and pushing things out. Hillenberg thought this was a good metaphor for the character's personality. The show premiered on May 1st, 1999, following the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards. The first episode shown was Help Wanted, written by Hillenberg himself. The second and third episodes, Reef Blower and Tea at the Tree Dome, aired the same night. The response was immediate. Children responded to the show from its first broadcast, and it grew quickly into one of the most watched programs on the network. Hillenberg served as the showrunner and guiding creative force through the first 3 seasons of the show and the first SpongeBob movie, released in 2004. These years, seasons 1 through 3 and the movie, are what most people mean when they refer to the classic era. They represent the period when Hillenberg had direct creative control over the show's direction, tone, and content. His philosophy for the show was specific and consistent. He wanted SpongeBob to be funny for adults and children at the same time, but for different reasons. Children would laugh at the surface comedy, and adults would find something more layered underneath. He wanted the show to feel like it was genuinely set underwater, with backgrounds and designs that reflected real ocean environments, even while the story logic was completely absurd. He wanted the characters to be emotionally honest, even inside comedic situations, to feel like real people with real histories and real feelings, not just delivery systems for jokes. He also had a rule about SpongeBob that he maintained throughout his time running the show. SpongeBob could not leave the water. The show was about the ocean. Taking SpongeBob out of the ocean and into human environments was, in Hillenberg's view, a betrayal of what the show was supposed to be. After the 2004 movie, Hillenberg stepped back from running the show day to day. He had intended the movie to be the final chapter of SpongeBob's story, a proper ending. Nickelodeon chose to continue the show beyond the movie without him in the same role. Hillenberg remained connected to the show in various capacities, but was no longer the primary creative voice guiding it after season 3. The show continued and remained popular, but the years following his departure are the ones fans and critics most often point to when discussing a change in the show's quality and tone. The classic era ends, in most readings of the show's history, when Hillenberg stepped away. He returned to a more active role later, and was involved with the show again in its later seasons. He publicly expressed his pride in what the show had become, and his affection for the characters he had created across his career. In 2017, Stephen Hillenberg was diagnosed with ALS, a progressive disease that affects the nerves controlling movement. He announced his diagnosis publicly, and continued working on the show despite it. He remained involved with Spongebob through the final period of his life. He died on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57. The response from the animation world, from Nickelodeon, from the cast and crew of SpongeBob, and from the audience that had grown up with the show was immediate and genuine. Tom Kenny, who voiced SpongeBob for the entire run of the show, spoke publicly about Hillenberg in terms that made clear this was not just a professional relationship, but a genuine friendship built over decades of shared work. The rest of the cast expressed similar feelings. What Hillenberg left behind was a world, not a collection of episodes, or a brand, or a franchise, though it became all of those things. A world, with geography and history, and characters who had lives extending beyond what any single episode showed, with a mythology that started in prehistoric times and stretched forward into the far future, with relationships built on years of shared experience, and grief, and loyalty, and rivalry. He built it out of a love for tide pools, and a belief that children were worth telling good stories to. He built it with the same instinct he had used to make an educational comic for kids at a Marine Institute, that a story would reach people in a way that a fact alone never could. The world he built was richer, and stranger, and more melancholy, and more joyful than most people who watched it as children fully absorbed. It had a fry cook who cried from happiness, a squid who sat alone in a white void and finally admitted he was lonely, a crab who built an empire out of fear of being poor again, a squirrel who carried Texas inside her even at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, a starfish who gave up intelligence to keep a friendship, a teacher who showed up every day to a school that had become a source of ongoing disaster for her, and underneath all of them, buried in the sand of Conch Street, a history going back further than any of them knew. Prehistoric ancestors, medieval kingdoms, Wild West towns, and centuries of accumulated life in a city sitting at the bottom of the sea beneath a place where nuclear bombs once went off. Stephen Hillenberg saw all of that in a tide pool. And then he made sure the rest of us could see it too. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.